region, and also both of them are members of our global communications leadership team. So I'll turn it over to both of them, and I'll be back to chat with all of you a little later on in the program. So again, thank you very much for coming. And in fact, let's do this. Before I turn over, why don't we start with our invocational prayers to Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gordavani Pitane Sesha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. And of course, to all of you, Vancha Kalpatarubhyas Chakripa Sindhu Vyacha Patitan and Paramyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha. So I'll turn it over to Alessia and Baladev. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Anutam Prabhu. My name is Baladev Das, Director of Communication of Latin America or South America. I will be your co-host during this conference. Dear Vaishnavas, on behalf of the Iskcon Global Communication Ministry, we welcome you all. It is very pleasant for us to know that many participants have signed up for this event. As every year, the Ministry of Communications makes an effort to improve communications in the face of society and the different social organisms that in one way or another have relevance for the diffusion of Krishna consciousness throughout the world, as well as the importance of maintaining a cooperative spirit among the members of Srila Prabhupada movement and missions, who, as you know, proclaim your love for me will be demonstrated in the way you work cooperatively. This year has been a path of great challenge and great achievements. In addition to the limitation of COVID-19, for which we will have an overview of what was done during this year by His Grace Anuttama Prabhu, our Global Ministry of Communications. Shriman Madan Gopal Prabhu, North America Co-Director of Communication, will give us an interesting speech about identifying bias in the news media, which is a new subject that human must learn in this age of Kali Yuga, what to say about communicators. In addition, we will have Yudhishthira Govinda Prabhu, our Director of Communication for India, and Bhakta Das, Director of Communication for Australasia, with an overview of the sad situation in Bangladesh and the attack on our temples, where several devotees lost their lives. The main theme that summoned us to this meeting has arisen from their own interest manifested in the survey of the last conference, reconciling different perspectives of Srila Prabhupada's statement, for which we have invited His Grace Radhika Ramana Prabhu to give us a conciliatory vision from the human, Vaishnava, and secular academic understanding. We hope to get the most out of his wisdom. For that, we will also have a Q&A session. So, finding the substance of Srila Prabhupada's message as being able to communicate it so that it is properly understood is and will continue to be our challenge for the future. Just as Srila Prabhupada expressed on his arrival in Manhattan aboard the Jaladuta in his feeling helplessness through his poetry, Markine Bhagavata Dharma. How will I make them understand this message of Krishna consciousness? I am very unfortunate, unqualified, and the most fallen. Therefore, I am seeking your benediction so that I convince them, for I am powerless to do so on my own. Somehow or another, O Lord, you have brought me here to speak about you. Now, my Lord, it is up to you to make me a success or failure, as you like. O spiritual master of all the worlds, I can simply repeat your message. So if you like, you can make me power. I speak suitable for their understanding. Only by your causeless mercy will my words become pure. I am sure that when this transcendental message penetrates their hearts, they will certainly feel engaged and thus become liberated from all unhappy condition of life. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So, dear Vaishnavas, our gratitude to all devotees today, and special thanks to all devotees who help us to build this exciting new gathering for the pleasure of Krishna and Srila Prabhupada and all the devotees of the Lord. May your blessing be with us. Gaura Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai. Next, I invite Bhaktino Lesia from Moscow, Russia. She has been doing the service of communications manager in the Russian team for more than 10 years. One of her responsibilities is to provide the connection between the communication devotees in Russia and the rest of the world. So, Olesha Prabhu, welcome.
Thank you, Baladev Prabhu. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you for joining us today. Добро пожаловать на нашу конференцию. That was a small welcome in Russian. Next, we will have Bhakta Prabhu from Melbourne, Australia, who will say a prayer and a few words at the beginning of our conference. Bhakta Prabhu is the communications director of Australasia. He motivates devotees in his region to be better communicators and encourages them to build friendly relationships with representatives of different faiths and organizations. We welcome Bhakta Prabhu.
Thank you, Alicia. Before we start, we thought it was appropriate that we have a prayer for people that are currently having difficulty with the COVID-19 pandemic. So the prayer is as follows. We pray for all devotees who left their bodies due to this pandemic, whether they were gurus, senior Prabhupada disciples, or simply members of Prabhupada's Iskcon family. We pray that by Lord Krishna's mercy, they may go on and serve the Lord of their heart. We convey our deepest sympathy and support to all those who have lost their loved ones due to the coronavirus outbreak. To all the dear devotees, life members and associates of Iskcon who have contracted and are suffering in any way due to this ongoing coronavirus disease, or those who may contract this virus in the future, we pray that the Supreme Lord's mercy may rest upon you and soothe you during these disturbing and unpredictable times. We praise the many selfless efforts our Iskcon devotees worldwide have made by providing counseling, financial support, and prasadam meals to literally thousands and thousands in need due to this corona pandemic all over the world. To the medical doctors, nurses, and supporting staff who are in the front line of the fight against COVID-19, may Lord Krishna sustain them and inspire them to render life-saving services with due care, love, and compassion. Finally, we pray that Lord Krishna may grant all the bereaved families and friends his merciful consolation and strengthen their faith and determination in Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement, especially in these most disturbing times, by enthusing them to chant the Maha Mantra even more sincerely under the ever-present guidance of the founder Acharya of Iskcon, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Bhakta Prabhu. So let me introduce to Radhika Raman Prabhu. Dr. Ravi Gupta, Radhika Raman Das, is the Charles Red Professor of Religious Studies and head of the Department of History, Religious Studies, and Classics at Utah State University. He is the author or editor of 4 books, including an abridged translation of the Bhagavata Purana with Kenel Valpi, Srila Krishna Kshetra Maharaj, published in 2017 by Columbia University Press. Ravi has received 4 Teachings Awards, a National Endowment for the Humanities Summer Fellowship, 3 research fellowship, and a book award. He is a permanent research fellow of the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies and a past president of the Society for Hindu-Christian Studies. He speaks around the world on topics related to Chaitanya Vaishnavism, Vedanta philosophy, and Krishna Bhakti tradition. He grew up in Boise, Idaho, where his parents ran the Iskcon Center. He is a disciple of His Holiness Hanumat Prasad Swami, and he serves on the GBC Shastric Advisory Council, as well as the BBT Editorial Review Panel. So, Prabhu, the microphone is yours. We are very excited to hear about your talk.
Thank you so much, Baladev Prabhu, and all the organizers of the conference for giving me this opportunity to say a few words about a challenging topic. I want to begin by offering my respects to His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatari. So we have about an hour, and I'm going to try to split it approximately in half, maybe a little bit more in terms of my comments, maybe around 35 minutes or so, and then the rest of the time for discussion, questions and comments from all of you, which I'm very eager to hear. We all recognize that there are difficult statements in Srila Prabhupada's books that are challenging for a variety of reasons, but typically because they don't match or gel very well with our own cultural, political, social contexts. In today's talk, I'm not going to address any specific controversial issues or statements or talks because of the fact that each one of these requires plenty of research and time to address, certainly not in 35 minutes, but rather what I'm going to try to do, and I know Iskcon Communications has been working on addressing these issues in a more detailed and broader frame. But my goal here today is to give all of us some foundational principles to think through as we consider such difficult statements, whatever they might be, or confusing statements, whatever they might be in our own national, cultural, personal contexts. And hopefully that'll be of some use to all of us here. So I've got a slide presentation to share, so give me just a minute. Those of you who know how I present know that this is highly unusual for me to use a slideshow, but there are certain things here where a graphic would be quite useful. So the first thing I want to say is that the meaning of any statement depends not only on the words being used, but also on the realization of the listener or reader. And this sounds like a very straightforward point, but we forget it quite often, I think, that in any sort of understanding of Shastra, there's two poles to it. There's not just the speaker, it's not just the author or the writer who is doing the communication, the conveying, but also the person who is listening and reading. And as any experienced teacher knows, what one actually says and intends to say and what is understood by the audience can be two very different things. And there is often a limit to how much of our intention we can convey. And this is expressed very nicely in that verse in Srimad Bhagavatam that ends, Yathadhitam Yathamati. That Sutta Goswami is saying, I'm now going to explain it as I have learned, as I have heard it, but also as I have realized it. And that what is learned is what we receive, and what we realize is what we bring to the conversation. And those two things are always present together. Now, this is because for two reasons. One is why is the listener or the reader so much part of the picture in terms of understanding? And this is because the scriptures are unlimitedly deep, number one. So there's many layers of meaning in the Shastras and in Srila Prabhupada's statements. In the words of a pure devotee, there are numerous, limitless layers of meaning. It's like a well that keeps giving us water, or a mine that never ceases to give us valuable jewels. And what we procure from that, the different layers of meaning, often has a lot to do with the specific needs and capacities and abilities, but also our proclivities, our perspectives. And this is why we find that the acharyas have so many layers of commentary, often on the same verse in the scriptures, but also why different people understand in different ways. And my favorite example of this is from Bhagavatam, when Krishna has just departed this world in the first canto. Arjuna is heartbroken, and one of the ways in which he pacifies his separation, his pain of separation from Krishna, is he remembers the instructions that Krishna gave him on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. As he remembers those instructions, and as the Pandavas remember those instructions, the consequence of that remembrance is that they decide to leave home, leave the kingdom, and retire from worldly life, to go to the Himalayas for their final journey. Now, think about this. Just those very same instructions, the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna heard them on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Arjuna's response was exactly the opposite. Right? At that point, he wanted to go to the forest or to the Himalayas, wherever. And Krishna is telling him, no, you can't. You have to stay here and fight and engage and win the kingdom. So the same teachings, when heard earlier in his life, led him to engage, to fight, to battle. And those same instructions, when heard later in his life, led him to disengage, to withdraw from the kingdom. The words themselves didn't change. And one presumes that at that time, everyone had very, very good memories. So Arjuna knows what he heard. He's the ideal student of Bhagavad Gita. And yet the application of that and the meaning was not only different, but the opposite when it came to a different phase in his life. So depending on our needs, our capacities, and our devotional perspectives at an advanced level, even our rasa, our relationship with the Lord, what a particular statement means from Guru, Sadhu, or Shastra will change in the course of time as a result of our own capacity or stance. And therefore, our own mood and our own values and our own quality, introspection is so important when we're dealing with difficult statements from Srila Prabhupada. It's not just about the statement, it's also about us. And we have to be willing to be very open and honest about our own capacity to understand and our own willingness to understand in order to make sense of what Prabhupada is saying or what the scriptures are saying. So the same text can mean very different things based on the understanding or interpretation of the reader, of the listener. And not all interpretations are equal. Some are very much unacceptable. They commit violence to the text. They push the meaning so far off the pale that it's not, it's not considered to be appropriate. Just like where Srila Prabhupada often mentions the interpretation of Bhagavad Gita as the chariot is the body and Krishna is the intelligence and Arjuna is the soul, and that kind of thing. When we reduce it to a merely symbolic or metaphorical understanding, that pushes the meaning of the text too far beyond what is allowable, right? So not every interpretation is equal by any means, but the perspective, the interpretation of the reader does make a difference. And to show you just how much of a difference this makes, I want to begin with a statement that doesn't come from the Vaishnava tradition directly, but from the Christian tradition. And the reason for this is because it's often much easier to see the power of interpretation at work when we don't have a huge stake in the outcome, to be able to see it from a distance. And then, of course, we'll get to things that we actually have a huge stake in. But as a starting point, and as an example, it's actually very useful to see things in another person's tradition. This is, on a side note, this is one of the many reasons that interfaith work is so valuable, is that it really does provide us a mirror in which to see ourselves and to see ourselves more objectively. So here's a famous statement from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 5. This is part of Jesus Christ's Sermon on the Mount, where he makes many famous statements, one of which is, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Now, let's try a variety of different interpretations. If I were to take an uninformed interpretation of this statement, because I'm not Christian myself and I know nothing about Christianity, it would seem to be quite straightforward. If you're humble, you can expect to wake up the next morning and be king of the world. That, of course, is a ridiculous interpretation from a Christian perspective. Very few Christians in the history of the world have been rulers or kings. Emperor Constantine was one, but he was one amongst very, very few. So most Christians are quite poor, in fact. So this interpretation has never been used, and it doesn't make much sense. It comes from ignorance. A more common interpretation amongst Christians is that if we are humble, then we can expect that either in the end times, when Jesus returns in the second coming, or in heaven, we can receive the earth, as in the earth will be that place where God's will is done. And if we are in sync with God's will, then the earth will be ours, right? So not in a political sense of rulership, but in a sense that the earth is belonging to the Lord. And if we're in sync with his view, with his perspective, and with his desire, then we receive it as well. That's a common interpretation and not too radical in any way. But we can add further depth to our understanding if we take something that is, if we add a little bit of historical knowledge to our understanding. When Jesus was speaking this a couple thousand years ago, he was speaking this to an audience, primarily a Jewish audience. And the Jews at that time were expecting a Messiah, a savior who would come and liberate them from oppression. They were expecting someone who would do this in a military, powerful fashion, who would lead them to real physical victory. The idea that Jesus is proposing that we turn the other cheek and we be humble and meek in the face of such oppression is radical, it's powerful, and it's dangerous as well, right? So we can increase our appreciation for the power of what Jesus is saying. We can double that appreciation by recognizing the context in which he's saying it, which is actually not at all amenable. It's not favorable to a statement like this. Let's push it a little bit further. We know that in modern times, there was the famous political theorist named Karl Marx, and he had a very unfriendly relationship in relation to religion as a whole. And he looked at a statement like this, and if we were to try a Marxist interpretation, he said, look, if we are, this is the problem with religion as a whole. This statement epitomizes the problem with religion. It asks all the poor to say, stay humble and weak and stay quiet, and keeps them down by promising them a great future in their next life. And by promising them spiritual glorification, religion allows the rich and the powerful, which includes religious leaders, but also political leaders. It allows them to be all powerful, and it allows them to be oppressive towards the poor and keep their positions, their monopoly in society. So he had a very strong criticism of religion, and his criticism was not entirely wrong. There are instances where religion does this, we know very well. But then that Marxist interpretation in more recent times has been turned on its head by Christians themselves, particularly Catholics, in the area of liberation theology, who have said, no, in fact, Jesus is speaking the opposite here. He's uplifting those who are poor. He's saying that I stand next to those who are poor. And he is encouraging us to not only be humble, but to fight for those who are poor and those who are meek, to take up their cause as our own cause, as Jesus's own cause. So this comes to something called liberation theology, which is very, very powerful in South America, for example, but now all over the world, where people have seen this as a call to action for social change on behalf of the poor and the downtrodden. Now, all of that to say that just see the power of interpretation, of the assumptions that the reader brings in reading a statement, of the foundation of the principles that come to reading scripture. That when we take any statement, the same words, everyone agrees on the words. That's not the disagreement here, but it can mean something very different. In fact, it can mean the opposite thing, depending on the stance of the listener. Like I said, not all such interpretations are made equal. And every tradition has boundaries on what are considered acceptable and what are considered unacceptable interpretation. Here's an example of wonderful, acceptable interpretation from our own tradition. And I love this passage from Krishna book, the chapter on the killing of Putana, where Prabhupada writes, Krishna showed the nature of a small baby and closed his eyes as if to avoid the face of Putana. The closing of the eyes is interpreted and studied in different ways by the devotees. Some say that Krishna closed his eyes because he did not like to see the face of Putana, who had killed so many children and who had now come to kill him. Others say that Putana hesitated to take the baby on her lap because something extraordinary was being dictated to her from within. And in order to give her assurance, Krishna closed his eyes so that she would not be frightened. Another interpretation is that Krishna closed his eyes because he simply took Putana to be his nurse. Putana came to Krishna just to offer her breast for the Lord to suck. Krishna is so merciful that even though he knew Putana was there to kill him, he took her as his nurse or mother. There are other interpretations that, for the sake of space, I left out in the ellipses, those dots in the middle. But Prabhupada gives 4 or 5 different interpretations that come directly from the commentaries of our acharyas for something as seemingly simple as, why did Krishna close his eyes when he was drinking from Putana's breast? So, what kinds of interpretations are acceptable? When we find a difficult statement, how do we deal with it? And the basic answer is actually very simple, which is that the scriptures and the spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, give us the basic principles that can guide how we interpret or understand any statement in Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, including difficult ones. Let me give you one example. This is not an example I want to spend much time on because we'll look at other things that are more directly relevant to our issue at hand. But if we think about hermeneutical principles, just an example of how scripture gives us sometimes very clearly hermeneutical principles. So I should mention here before that when I mention hermeneutical, this is a word that is probably new to some of us. Hermeneutics refers to the principles, the theory, the method of interpretation. When we think about how do we study, how do we understand, how do we know how to understand a statement from scripture? That is hermeneutics, the method and theory of interpretation. And in Sanskrit, this is called mimamsa. Right? Mimamsa has multiple meanings, but in this context, the word mimamsa means inquiry into exegesis or into interpretation. How do we understand the meaning of scripture? Okay, so that's hermeneutics. But hermeneutics is guided by certain principles. And we all have certain principles that guide us in our understanding. We can either have these unknowingly, or we can have those principles consciously. It's much better to be conscious of what is guiding our understanding, our explanation of scripture, rather than doing it without realizing. There is no reader of scripture who does not have some hermeneutics as at play, some method of understanding. And Srila Prabhupada, quite wonderfully, was very of his fundamental book, Bhagavad Gita, as it is. Those three words, as it is, are stating a hermeneutical principle, a principle of interpretation. And what is that principle? This one here, taken from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila chapter 7, 108, verse 108. It's an easy number to remember because it's text 108. And also it's found in, so this is the conversation between Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Prakashananda Saraswati on Vedanta. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu restates the exact same principle in his conversation with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya in Madhya Lila. And the principle is this: whenever we read a statement from scripture or guru or sadhu, we have to take the primary or the direct meaning first, mukhya vritti. Only if the direct meaning doesn't work, we can take indirect meanings. We can venture in that way. But if Krishna says that, if the Gita says Krishna is on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, we take that as it is. He was on a battlefield and it was called Kurukshetra. We don't move to indirect interpretations unless the direct interpretation doesn't work. And in this case, it works just fine. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu argues against Shankaracharya to say that Shankaracharya started with indirect interpretations to begin with, and that was committing violence to the Vedanta Sutra. It was committing violence to the text. So this is an example of a fundamental principle that Srila Prabhupada encapsulated in his famous 3 words, as it is. Now, what I want to look at here, there are many, many principles that we could draw out from Prabhupada's books, from the scriptures, from the works of our acharyas, but there are 3 principles in particular that are especially useful when it comes to addressing the challenging or difficult statements that we find in Srila Prabhupada's books. And I want to go through those 3 principles briefly, because I think they'll be useful for our specific question today. And then, like I said, there are other principles that one could discuss that we won't have time for. So the first one, each one of these 3 principles is such that they seem very straightforward when we first look at them, and yet again and again throughout our experience in the community of devotees, we find that they're often not applied, at least not applied very consistently. So the first principle comes from the idea of samanvaya, which is present in the Vedanta Sutra already. Tattu samanvayat, 5th Sutra, Vedanta Sutra, which means that whenever we take a statement, we have to understand that statement in relation to the entirety of that person, that author's, namely Srila Prabhupada's, writings and actions on that topic. So we don't take a statement just on its own, independently. How often have we heard persons, perhaps we're guilty of the same thing, of taking a quote and using it as a weapon to make our point, completely ignoring the various other statements that Srila Prabhupada made on a particular topic. Srila Prabhupada often spoke in different ways for different audiences. This is the mark of a good teacher. Anyone who's an expert teacher needs to begin with where their audience is at and speak according to the needs and capacities of that audience. We see this repeatedly throughout Srimad Bhagavatam. We see it in Srila Prabhupada's life as well. And so he spoke differently based on the audience. He also emphasized things differently based on what the text was focusing on that he was commenting upon. So sometimes Srimad Bhagavatam speaks very strongly against the attachments of family life. Other times, Srimad Bhagavatam speaks of family life as very helpful for the average person. Prabhupada, depending on the thrust and the mood of that particular verse or section of Bhagavatam, would emphasize the point of detachment or rejection of family life, or he would emphasize the importance of family life, depending on, again, the nature of the text. So his explanation could vary based on the needs of the audience. It could also vary based on the needs of the text upon the scripture upon which he was commenting. And all the acharyas do exactly the same thing. When we take these statements out of their contexts and independently of one another, we come to a picture of contradiction and dichotomy and opposition. And it starts, one can make Srila Prabhupada look very contradictory by doing such a thing. And this is why, because this problem exists, the Vedanta Sutra and the Acharyas make it very clear that we have to practice samanvaya. We should take a teacher's words in relation to everything they have taught and in relation to the actions, to the behavior that they have shown. Because in those actions, we see the application of those principles. So in the Muslim tradition, for example, one has the Quran, the statements of scripture, but then equally important are the hadith, the actions and life of the Prophet Muhammad. Because in those actions and his life, we can see how he understood and applied those statements in his actions, right, from scripture. So we have the same in Srila Prabhupada. We have his behavior and we have his actions. Now, together, these form a hermeneutical circle. Hermeneutics is full of circles. And normally, circular thinking is considered to be a problem if you go in circles. We consider that to be, oh, he's just walking in circles, or he's thinking in circles. But in hermeneutics, circles are actually very, very important and very wonderful, because a circle is how we increase the depth of our understanding. We, in our own Vaishnava tradition, have wonderful use of circles. They're called parikramas, right? Where we do these pilgrimages, sometimes short, sometimes a month long, like Rajamandal Parikrama, where you start in one place, you go in a big circle, and you end up in exactly the same place again. And from an outsider's perspective, this is a pointless exercise. You have literally gone in a circle and not gone anywhere. You have returned exactly where you started, in a parikrama. And yet the point of that circle, of that parikrama, is that in the process of doing that circular pilgrimage, our understanding, our relationship with Krishna has grown deeper in that moment. So also in our understanding, in our reading of Prabhupada's books and his statements, we have to go in circles to deepen our understanding over and over again throughout the course of our lives. This process never ends. And one of these hermeneutical circles that is tied to the principle that we just discussed is the relationship between the whole and the part. The entirety of Prabhupada's statements and his actions as well, and a specific statement from Prabhupada's books or a specific action from his life. That's the part. The whole and the part have to go together. You have to study the part in detail, that statement, and analyze it from, as Prabhupada says, every angle of vision, from multiple angles of vision. Prabhupada uses that statement many times in his letters. We have to study from multiple angles of vision, that statement. But then we have to put it in the context of the whole and everything that Prabhupada did. And we have to see the big picture of his mood and his mission. And then we have to connect that. As we understand his overall mood and mission, what happens? We understand that statement more deeply. And when we understand that statement more deeply, we get a better understanding of his mood and mission. And in this way, we go in circles, each feeding the other. The second principle that I want to highlight that's quite useful for our purposes is this one. And this is, if there's one principle to take away from today's talk, it's this one, which is that we always need to understand this statement in relation to the historical context in which it was spoken. This is called Desha, Kala, and Patra. Desha meaning the land or the country, the space. Kala meaning the time period. And Patra meaning the audience or the recipient, or more generally, the circumstance overall. So Desha, Kala, Patra. And in technical Vedanta, this is often also called Sambandha, the relation of a statement to its particular context. So what does this mean? Understanding Srila Prabhupada's statement in relation to the historical context in which it was spoken. The Acharya, the pure devotee, as well as the scriptures, are never controlled by the context in which they appear. That's the point, is that they have come to transform the context in which they appear. There is something that needs to be changed. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata. There's a problem. There's abdharma. And so the context is not appropriate. So they're not controlled by that context. To the contrary, they want to change it. But in order to change the context, they always respond to and act in sync with the context of their time. One very straightforward example of this is how in the 4 ages, Krishna comes to teach a different method of achieving him. Why? Because the historical context is different. Satya Yuga is different than the age of Kali. And because of that, the teaching that Krishna provides as the primary means for achieving him is quite different. It's not that meditation doesn't work in Kali Yuga. It's not that chanting the holy names doesn't work in Satya Yuga. But what Krishna emphasizes in a particular age has a lot to do with what the historical context is like in which he appears, what the situation of the age is. A less obvious example, if we study Chaitanya Charitamrita, as far as I can tell, and there may be an exception to this, but in general, it seems that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, after taking sannyas, never accepted prasad at the home of anyone except a Brahmana, someone who was a caste Brahmin. Now, if Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had appeared today, would he accept prasad at the homes of all these wonderful devotees who are not from Brahmin families from India? Looking at his interaction with Haridas Thakur, how he brings him prasad when Haridas is not allowed to come into the Jagannath temple, seeing how he embraces him and how he feeds him and how he dances with his body after his passing away, we would like to think, yes, it seems very likely that Mahaprabhu would come to the home of wonderful Brahminical Vaishnav devotees who are part of our movement today. But in that historical context, a non-Brahmana would not have even dreamed of extending an invitation to a sannyasi. The 16th century in India, 15th century, was one of the harshest times when it came to caste discrimination based on physical birth. We know this historically. It was a very, very difficult time. And the idea that someone like Haridas Thakur or someone from a low caste would have the courage to walk up to a sannyasi in a temple and say, please come to my home for lunch, was practically unthinkable. I say practically because there's probably an instance or two, but the vast, vast majority of situations like that, it would have been unthinkable. In fact, that person probably would have gotten beaten by others in the surrounding to dare to do such a thing. So there's a certain context in which we recognize that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was quite substantially pushing against, right? In doing what he did with Haridas Thakur, when we understand the historical context in which he was operating, we can appreciate that what Mahaprabhu did by taking food to Haridas Thakur was radical. It was, dare I say, dangerous. Right? At that time, for a sannyasi to go give food to an outcast person who was not allowed to enter the temple of Lord Jagannath, and to touch him and to embrace him. And then when he were to leave his body, for a sannyasi anyway to touch a body, to a dead body, would have been unthinkably polluting. But to do that with the dead body of an outcast person, to put it very crudely, right? This is very crude language, but I want us to understand just how radical, just how shocking that would have been. Why Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami spends time discussing this. Yes, it's demonstrating the love of Mahaprabhu for Haridas Thakur, but we need to understand just the extent of that love, what he was willing to risk to show his love for Haridas was social discomfort, scandal, confrontation as a result of doing something like that. So like I said earlier in the case from the Bible, when we understand the historical context, our appreciation for what Srila Prabhupada did can grow so deep and so wonderfully because we recognize just how powerful he was, both in speaking to the historical context in ways that would be acceptable for his times. Because if you push too hard, no one's going to listen to you, right? It's going to be too crazy and no one's going to accept you. So he did act in ways that were fairly common at the time, that may be rather uncommon today, right? He did things that in our context may be not so acceptable, but they were acceptable in his times. At the same time, he pushed against his own environment, his own context in very sometimes radical ways that we can appreciate if we understand that context. No one should be blamed for acting according to their context. No one should be blamed for pushing back against that context. This is the work of an acharya. In fact, it's the work of an avatar as well, to act in accordance with the situation and to push back against it. And think of any controversial, difficult statement from Srila Prabhupada. And if you do sufficient research, you will find that both of these elements are true in that statement. Prabhupada was speaking in ways that were amenable to the context, his own context, in the early 20th century and mid 20th century, and his own background and upbringing, but also as the Acharya, as the transcendent devotee of the Lord, he was also pushing back against and rejecting that context as well. One of the things, and this is a side note, that after years and years and years of studying Srila Prabhupada's books and very much loving him in a very personal way, growing up with him, I've come to the conviction that Prabhupada is a very reasonable person. He's a gentleman, right? And I know that sounds really obvious, but sometimes when we look at some of these very difficult statements and all the controversies that are created and so on, we can forget that very simple fact, that almost every difficult statement that I've found, Prabhupada makes another statement that softens it, that makes it easier to digest, that shows the other side and his care and his love for his disciples and his followers, and for anyone who stood before him and was sincere in their desire to understand Krishna. So this too forms a hermeneutical circle, the Siddhanta and the context. The Siddhanta is eternal. It never changes. It is absolute. This is why it's called the absolute truth. And yet that Siddhanta operates in a specific historical context and is applied in a historical context. That's the point of the devotee's appearance. That's the point of the avatar's appearance. And that, when we understand that context, our appreciation for the Siddhanta deepens, just as in the example I gave. And when we understand the Siddhanta better, we can better understand just how amazing it was in the historical context in which it was spoken. So our depth of understanding increases as we go around this hermeneutical circle. Once again, this principle can be thought of as a form of a hermeneutical circular thinking with Siddhanta and context. One other little example of Siddhanta and context that play with each other. You know that verse from Bhagavad Gita, apichet suduracharo, even if someone does an abominable action, it will be, it's okay. That person is still to be considered a sadhu if they are rightly situated in their consciousness as a devotee of Krishna. In commenting upon that verse, Srila Ramanujacharya says that when Krishna says duracharo, that person is really a bad actor. That's what durachara means, a bad actor. He's referring to that if a devotee breaks caste rules, they are still to be considered a sadhu, even if they don't follow the rules of their caste. In Prabhupada's purport, from what I remember, he says nothing about caste in this statement. He speaks of this in terms of fall down and largely accidental fall down from the path of bhakti. The reason for that is because breaking of caste rules was a major concern in Ramanujacharya's time. In Srila Prabhupada's time, especially in preaching in a global scale, it was less of a concern. But also Prabhupada brought his own understanding to that particular purport for the purpose of speaking to his audience and also in relation to his own understanding of Shastra. So Acharyas will emphasize different things that are simultaneously true, but different based on the context, the historical context in which they are speaking. So whenever we come to a difficult statement, we always want to take the time to research the context or to read others who have researched that context to be able to better understand that difficult statement. The third and last principle that I want to mention before we break here soon is that we always understand Srila Prabhupada in relation to the tradition, the Parampara, and we understand the Parampara in relation to Srila Prabhupada. Often this is a cause for debate amongst devotees. Which comes first, Prabhupada or the Acharyas? And the problem with that question is that it is a linear question. It assumes that we start in one place and end in another. We start with Prabhupada and then we go to the Acharyas and then that's it. And then we discovered something different in the Acharyas than what Prabhupada says. Now we're stuck. So better we start with the Acharyas and then we can understand Prabhupada better. But then Prabhupada, when we read Prabhupada, it doesn't match with we're stuck again, right? So linearity in hermeneutics is really quite a problem. And this is why, again, a hermeneutical circle is so useful. Yes, as followers of Srila Prabhupada, we always begin with his statements. This is true theoretically, and it's also true practically. For, I think, more or less all of us in this Zoom call, our understanding of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Parampara began with Srila Prabhupada. He was the one we encountered first. So do we begin with Srila Prabhupada? The answer is, well, we don't really have a choice. We already have begun with him. Maybe there's one or two people here who were already Gaudiya Vaishnavas before encountering Srila Prabhupada, but it's a rare, rare thing. For most of us, Srila Prabhupada is where we began and where we should continue to begin. But beginning, again, should not imply linearity. When we study Srila Prabhupada's books, we find that he gave us the essence. He gives us the nectar, the summary of the commentaries of the Acharyas and the tradition that came before himself. He is, as he says so often, my only credit is that I have not invented anything. Right? So I have repeated as it is. He was very, very proud of that fact, that he was not creating things of his own accord. So by his own statement, he's conveying to us the essence of Parampara. And when we read his purports, we see that. So by understanding Srila Prabhupada, our appreciation for the Parampara grows deeper. And when Srila Prabhupada says that devotees should study the Sandarbhas on Jiva Goswami's appearance day, he says this in a conversation. So we go and we study, Gopi Pranadhana Prabhu's translation of Tattva Sandarbha on Jiva Goswami's appearance day. as we come to understand Jiva Goswami, we come to appreciate just what a miraculous thing Srila Prabhupada did in giving us the sandarbhas in his books and giving us a set of texts that is extremely technical and difficult to understand, and a set of books that were not written for us, honestly. They were not written for us, this audience, right? The modern world. They were written for a set of scholars and teachers that don't exist anymore, practically speaking. We understand what an amazing thing Prabhupada did in making all of that accessible, digestible, and providing us the essential aspects in his books. So when we study Srila Prabhupada, our appreciation for Parampara grows deeper. And as our appreciation for Parampara and our understanding of the Acharyas grows deeper, our appreciation for Srila Prabhupada should deepen. And if this circle gets blocked somewhere, that's when we have to be very, very cautious, right? That's when those are the alarm bells. We study the works of the Acharyas and our appreciation for Prabhupada doesn't grow deeper, we're in risky waters at that point. If we study Srila Prabhupada and we cannot appreciate our parampara and our heritage, we're in big trouble, right? So the hermeneutical circle functions well when we keep going in circles. When the circle stops, we're in trouble. Okay, so these are the three principles that I wanted to mention here. And I'll just conclude. I could give a couple more examples. Let's see how I'm doing. Okay, I don't have much time, so I'm going to stop here. I could give a couple more examples, but perhaps I'll have the opportunity to do so when we have some discussion, for which I want to definitely leave some time. Let me just end by saying that when Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita in the 9th chapter that he tells Arjuna, Kaunteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. Oh, Arjun, you declare it boldly to the world that my devotee never perishes. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, why does Krishna ask Arjun to do so? And the reason he gives is because people will believe Arjun more than they believe Krishna, because Krishna is known to break his promises, but he is also known to keep the promises of his devotee. Our job as Vaishnavas, especially as Vaishnava communicators, is to make Krishna, is to make Srila Prabhupada believable, understandable, to make them comprehensible, to make them look good. Prabhupada says in the Nectar of Devotion that a preacher is acting in the mood of friendship with the Lord. He's acting as Krishna's well-wisher. He's looking after, or she's looking after, Krishna's reputation, Prabhupada's reputation. He or she is making sure that people appreciate and understand that Krishna is their well-wisher, that Srila Prabhupada is their well-wisher. That's our job as Vaishnavas, to declare it boldly, because sometimes people may believe us even more than they believe the books, because we create a bridge to those statements, right? We allow them to build, to create that initial shraddha, adav shraddha, that little bit of shraddha is often born from the association of devotees, from the association of persons like ourselves who are in the task of communication. And when we serve in that way, like Krishna is asking Arjuna to do so, and we make Krishna believable, we are, even as Krishna is our greatest well-wisher, we can reciprocate that by acting in a well-wishing capacity for the Lord himself, and as a way to reciprocate for the wonderful gifts that Srila Prabhupada has given us. The controversies of our time will constantly change, right? They're always in flux. What are the big issues of the time? In 19th century India, there were when the British came to India, there were two major books that they encountered in Hinduism that they knew were important: the Ramayana and the Srimad Bhagavatam. These books have shaped Indian civilization. The only book that was widely studied in the West and appreciated and written about was the Ramayana, not the Bhagavatam. Why? Because in that time in Victorian England, Krishna was totally unacceptable to people. He was philanderous. He was, a debauchee in their eyes. He was hanging out with other men's wives in the middle of the night. So the British did not like that. They saw that as a perverted form of Hinduism. But Lord Ram, he was acceptable, straightforward, really strict in his behavior. They liked it. Well, here we are 100 or 200 years later. And guess what's happened in the appreciation of these two epics? Lord Ram now is the subject of intense criticism and controversy in the world because he's way too rigid, especially in his treatment of Mother Sita and especially in his treatment of Vali and so on. Lord Ram and the Ramayana is the source of controversy. And guess who everyone likes now? Who my students love when I talk about him is Krishna, because he represents the freedom and the love and the all-embracing quality of our times, of our world. My point is to say the controversies keep changing. And it's our job as every generation, it's our job to study the principles of our tradition, hermeneutical principles, and make those eternal truths, the Siddhanta, which never changes. Lord Ram is still God as he always was, and Krishna is still God, regardless of the time period. It's our job to make Krishna appreciable, to make the Lord and Srila Prabhupada appreciable and understandable, and apply those principles for the controversies and difficulties of our own times. For this, understanding hermeneutics can be very, very useful. And I'll just end with a little advertisement, which is to say the Shastric Advisory Council, of which I'm a member, has an 8-session GBC approved hermeneutics course of which this was just a small sample. This is not exactly any one of those sessions. I kind of drew from multiple sessions to give you a little bit of a sample on this particular topic, but it goes through a really wonderful array of all the different aspects of hermeneutics that are practically useful. If you read the Shastric Advisory Council's paper on this topic, it's quite detailed and dense, as it should be. But if you take the course, it's really well done and easy to understand for any devotee. So if anyone's interested, you can contact the chair of the Shastric Advisory Council, Urmila Devi, whose contact is there. So I've gone beyond what the time that I was expecting to go, and my apologies for that. But at this point, with whatever time we have left, I would be grateful to hear your thoughts and questions on this. Jai, thank you so much for this opportunity again. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk, Radhika Raman Prabhu. I'm sure that the devotees present have received powerful insights into the matter of reconciling different perspectives on Prabhupada's statements. And I will read out some questions that we received. And before we get into those, we would like to welcome all the senior devotees in our presence today. We see Malati Prabhu, Vishakha Prabhu, Vraja Vihari Prabhu, His Holiness Bhakti Gauravani Goswami, Janava Prabhu, Mahatma Prabhu, Nrisimhananda Prabhu, and others. Thank you for your participation. And now to the questions. So the first question is to clarify, are you suggesting that acharyas and shastra are not controlled by their historical contexts, but often do reflect them?
Yes, exactly. They reflect those contexts, they interact with them, they respond to them. That's why they appear, right? This is what Krishna says exactly in Bhagavad Gita. Yada, yada hi dharmasya glani. Yada, yada is basically referring to the context when dharma is in a problematic situation. Without responding to the context, there would be no need for anyone to appear. Krishna, his avatar or his Shakti Avesha avatar, they would not need to appear at all. So their context is important. One thing I forgot to mention is that we also have to pay attention to the fact that our context is important. As we are reading, we need to understand where we are coming from also. If we've got a Southern Baptist background, our approach to reading and our understanding of Prabhupada's books is going to be quite different than if we come from a caste Brahmin Hindu background, which is going to be very different than if we come from a, whatever, our nationality. Our own historical context is going to affect how we read the statements, not just the historical context in which the statement was made. So there's two contexts in play, and we have to be self-reflective also about, maybe I'm taking this statement in a very intense way because that's my background, right? I was the son of a Southern Baptist preacher, and this is how I like to approach Prabhupada's books. Or I come from a really, intense Hindu ritualistic background, and I love those statements where Prabhupada is focusing on the practice of ritual in deity worship. So we have to also recognize that maybe we may be emphasizing certain things a little bit more than others because of our own context.
All right, thank you so much for your clarification. Next question is, please help us understand how to recognize realization versus speculation versus interpretation.
Yes, so great question. How do we understand realization versus speculation? And the way to do that is to understand the boundaries of what is realization and what is speculation. The scriptures and the acharyas tell us when we move from speculation to, when we move from realization to speculation. That is exactly what the study of hermeneutics is. When we are clear on the hermeneutical principles, then we know when we have exceeded those boundaries. So for example, one hermeneutical principle that we haven't spoken of is adhikara, or the qualification of the person, who is what kinds of realization are we qualified to have at this point, right? So I may have a realization of Krishna is really my well-wisher. That's a realization that, hopefully we can each have in significant ways. But the realization that Krishna is doing his pastimes in Utah right now, outside my house, in my backyard, he did his Ras Leela last night, that's a realization I'm not yet, I don't have the adhikara to have, right? So hermeneutics does something very important. It shows us the boundaries within which we can understand, explain, or even interpret. The word interpretation is not a bad word inherently. Misinterpretation is what we want to avoid. But as we've seen, Prabhupada uses the word interpretation occasionally in a positive sense. Usually he means by it misinterpretation, uses it in a negative sense. But hermeneutics gives us the boundaries within which we can deepen and apply our understandings, and beyond which it becomes problematic. So hermeneutics allows us to apply Shastra to different contexts and to express our individuality. But hermeneutics also protects us from being, so that we are faithful to the tradition. It protects us from going beyond what is allowable. So we really have to have a clear understanding of what are the boundaries, what are those principles. I illustrated 4 principles in this talk, but there are others that help us understand the difference between realization and speculation.
Thank you so much for helping us understand this point. And the questions that I'm asking, I am taking them from the chat. We will not be able to answer, to give you all the questions because we are limited in time. But these questions are very valuable because we can understand what interests our listeners, like for future reference, for future conferences. So our third question would be, what do we do when someone chooses to push the more narrow or less gentlemanly perspective?
Yeah, this is a section. I'm sorry I keep referring to the course because it's very difficult to encompass everything in this talk. But there's a very valuable lesson in this course, which is taught by 8 different devotees. So you don't get just one person's perspective. but really quite a range of different, very nice learned perspectives on hermeneutics. But one of these sessions focuses entirely on that question: is what do we do in situations of when we have samvada or vivada? This is when we have conversations that are actually going to go somewhere because both sides want to deepen their understanding, right? So the conversations that we want to participate in is when there are sincere people who want to deepen their understanding, and we are sincere and we want to deepen our understanding. That leads to fruitful dialogue. If one of those parties or both ends up being in a situation where their purpose is to aggravate and to incite rather than to understand, and this often becomes clear, within 5 minutes of a conversation or a couple email exchanges or Facebook posts, we come to realize what this person is actually after. Then if understanding is not the goal and only argumentation and inciting, then that conversation is not going to go anywhere. We might still engage in a particular conversation because there are other listeners who could be benefited, but we do have to recognize that usually in such a situation, for that person, avoidance is the best remedy, because those conversations are not going to go anywhere. They're just going to end up wasting our time, but also aggravating our own consciousness in a way that is unnecessary. So the ability to distinguish between useful conversations and not very useful conversations is quite an important skill, and we talk about this. The hermeneutics course, by the way, can be organized for any yatra. If any of you want a course dedicated to your particular yatra or your country or your group of devotees who are working on a particular seva, then it can be done for specific audiences. But that's what I would say in response to the question, given the time limitation we have.
All right, thank you. Okay, so another question is, some say we must understand Prabhupada through other Shastra because what he says is not consistent and needs harmonizing. Please comment.
Yeah, this claim that what he says is not consistent and needs harmonizing. This is often couched as a criticism. But the reality is, I don't know of any writer or speaker or teacher who cannot be shown to be inconsistent, right? It's very easy to show any writer or any scripture is inconsistent. I mean, it's easy to do so with the Bhagavatam if one doesn't know what they are doing, right? If they don't have those interpretive skills that we're talking about, or if they're intentionally wanting to do so. The idea of harmonization is one of the duties that are described for any commentator, for any reader. I've already mentioned the word samanvaya, right, as very important, but also it's found in the first verse of Bhagavatam, anvaya vyatireka, right? Anvaya itaratascha keshva vignyasvarak, that you have anvaya and vyatireka, meaning you have statements that are contradictory in nature. And the ability to harmonize them is the skill of the reader. That is not given as the responsibility of the speaker. It's given as the responsibility of the listener, the capacity to harmonize. So if we are finding Prabhupada to be disharmonious, from a Shastric perspective, that is a problem with ourselves, not with its teacher. Because the teacher, like I said, is expected to speak differently to different audiences. That is their duty. And if we can't see how those are put together, then it means that our study needs to increase. So I would take that question, instead of couching it as a criticism, I would actually hold it up and say, yes, this is our job, right? That disharmony, that apparent disharmony, to harmonize that is our work.
Great, thank you. So we have two more questions from the chat, and they are quite similar. So I'd like to read them both as a single question. Your presentation is great for inside devotees. The general concern, however, I believe is for someone picking up Vedic literature for the first time that do not have benefit of immediate devotee association and the understanding of the principles put forth today. Many times we face someone more new or outside to Krishna consciousness who reads a difficult statement. Have you found this approach helpful in that context, or are there other principles in that context?
Excellent question. It would be thoroughly impractical to try to explain to someone who is not already an insider all the principles that we discussed and the mood in which we have to approach Shastra and so on. That's for us, right? This presentation is for us. Anyone else is welcome to of course, listen to it. There's nothing quiet or private about it, but it's not very useful. Our job as communicators is to take these principles, this understanding, put them into digestible forms that incorporate these ideas, and then put them out into the world. So let me give you a simple example that hopefully is not very controversial anymore today, right? During Prabhupada's time, in the 60s, during the Cold War, the moon landing was a big thing in the United States and in Russia and around the world. This was a big thing. And Prabhupada made statements about the moon landing that got some devotees very, very upset. And I've heard that some even left because of that, cognitive dissonance that they felt. Now, say we take Prabhupada's statement. Suppose someone starts a major controversy about the moon landing, which is, like I said, unlikely today, but maybe it still happens. Say someone brings up that controversy. We look at Prabhupada's statements on the moon landing. And if all we do in a situation, of a controversial situation with the public, if all we do is we say this little thing, namely, Srila Prabhupada made multiple types of statements about the moon landing. Sometimes he said that we did land on the moon, but it was an uninhabited part of the moon. Other times he said that we didn't go to the moon, but we went somewhere else in the solar system. Other times he said that we didn't go anywhere. The whole thing was a hoax. Prabhupada made all different statements on that topic. Just saying that to a reasonable person. And again, we assume that our audience is reasonable. If they're unreasonable, usually these conversations are worthless. But if we're speaking to a reasonable, innocent person in this regard, then just that statement helps them to recognize that Prabhupada was not entrenched as a conspiracy theorist against the moon landing. His principle, his Siddhantic statement, was that the moon, as described in the Shastras, is not accessible to human beings on Earth. Right? That was the principle he made consistent. What happened in 1960, 1969? What happened at that time, right? That was Prabhupada had different perspectives. That's an example of principle one. Now, in describing that, I never mentioned principle one. I never mentioned a hermeneutical circle. I just provided to you the simple fact that Prabhupada's statement should be understood in relation to everything he said about the moon landing. One could do something similar with his historical context. This statement by Srila Prabhupada was very important at the time because the moon landing was one of the most defining events of the 60s and 70s in the world, right? And he was responding to it. That statement helps the person understand why Prabhupada said it over and over and over again, even though he said different things about it, because he was making a point of Shastra versus technology and science. So we can apply these principles ourselves, put them into digestible forms, and this is where all of you are so skilled. This is where all of you have been so well trained to do so, right? Put them into digestible forms and put them out in the world for different audiences, whether it's a public audience or newcomers at the temple or whatever they might be. That's our work as communicators.
Thank you so much. There are so many interesting questions coming in from our listeners, and our team has a difficult time choosing between them because all of them are so good. So this may be the last question because we are going on a break soon, but we decided to take some time off the break. So perhaps this is the last question. I get them here on WhatsApp chat. they are being forwarded to me. So here it comes. Can we factor in Srila Prabhupada's particular nature and personality? For instance, Srila Prabhupada seems to often have a contrarian, provocateur, even playfully combative nature. Other acharyas display other personality traits. Where does this sort of acknowledgement of acharyas' personalities and personal inclinations fit into the hermeneutical principles?
Yes. So this is a really good question, very thoughtful question. And let me just say here that the answer in a simple form is yes. Every person's mood makes a difference, right? And in theologically, we might consider this to be rasa, that everyone brings a certain rasa, a certain mood to the practice of Krishna consciousness, including our acharyas. They all come in different moods and perspectives. Murari Gupta was a devotee of Lord Hanuman, and Ramananda Rai is in the mood of the gopis, and so we understand that fact. And yet at the same time, we have to be very, very careful when we attempt to analyze the mood and behavior and personality of the pure devotee, right? And Prabhupada makes this clear many times that we cannot understand the mood and actions of a devotee. He quotes from Chaitanya Charitamrita. So we just have to be very careful in that regard and be very cautious. Not that what is being asked is incorrect. Obviously, Krishna consciousness is personalism, right? We understand that everyone is a person, including Krishna, and that Krishna's mood is different than Lord Ramachandra's mood. And this is why it's often nice to listen to the Ramayana, and other times it's nice to listen to the 10th canto of Bhagavatam. And yet other times Nrsimha Leela is wonderful. So even Krishna has different moods and different avatars. So naturally, his devotees, his pure devotees, will express different personal individual traits that are characteristic of their mood. That is a fundamental principle of Vaishnavism, personalism. And yet when we take it upon ourselves to analyze that personality, we have to be very careful, because we run the risk of placing ourselves in a position of control over that person to whom we should be in a position of submission, right? When we analyze someone, we function as the psychologist, and that person functions as the patient. And if that mood develops, it can be very harmful for our own Krishna consciousness. So just to say that, yes, but with great care. We're great care in terms of how we approach that thought. This is also true in the context of our own spiritual masters who may be disciples of Srila Prabhupada, right? That we recognize that every devotee in our own times, we understand Srila Prabhupada's teachings through them, but we have to sometimes make adjustments for their particular mood and approach, the way in which they appreciate Srila Prabhupada's mood, right? Every devotee today, every senior devotee today appreciates one or more of Prabhupada's personality aspects in greater emphasis than others. Some devotees really appreciate Prabhupada's lion-like preaching nature, and others appreciate his softness towards his disciples and his compassion even to the most fallen. Some really appreciate his daring, adventurous spirit, and some really emphasize his instruction to boil the milk and, not keep expanding, but to go deeper. So even today, each one of us and our shiksha gurus and our leaders and teachers will appreciate different aspects of Srila Prabhupada like a multifaceted jewel. And it becomes the responsibility of the listener to take each one of these and adjust them, to understand that we're seeing one aspect of the jewel because the entirety is too much for anyone to comprehend. It's limitless. So I just want to end by giving my sincere thanks to all the devotees for your wonderful questions and comments, and for giving me this opportunity to say a few words to glorify our wonderful Srila Prabhupada and our Vaishnava scriptures. I want to thank especially Alessia Prabhu for fielding all these questions and making that easy for me, and to the translators who have been working very hard I know I tried to be slow in the presentation, but I sped up in my answer to questions because of lack of time. So my apologies to them and my thanks to them for their hard work in Russian and in Spanish. And then my thanks to the organizers, Anutma Prabhu, Madan Gopal Prabhu, and Baladev Prabhu, and everyone for giving me this opportunity in this forum. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Radhika Raman Prabhu, for this incredible and rich overview. I'm sure our audience will agree that it was well worth their time. We want to encourage all attendees to consider taking the hermeneutics course that you mentioned. The link to the course, materials, and other white papers from the Shastric Advisory Council is in the chat. On behalf of Iskcon Communications, we want to thank you. We will be taking a short 7-minute break, and we will continue with some really good presentations. So please come back shortly. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Radhika Raman Prabhu.
My pleasure. Thank you, Prabhu. It's always so nice to see you.
Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone again. Let me say a few words in Spanish, please. Muchas gracias a todos los devotos que se han sumado a esta conferencia a través de la página de Facebook de Iskcon Noticias y próximamente en nuestro canal de YouTube de Iskcon Noticias también. Esto ha sido posible gracias al desinteresado servicio de Vanamali Prabhu y Bhakta Ben, quienes amablemente han hecho un gran esfuerzo para nosotros los hispanoparlantes. Bienvenidos a todos y gracias por estar ahí presentes. So, we hope the conference is to your linking, and now let me introduce Madam Gopal Prabhu. He is co-director of communication for North America, and he is based in New Jersey. He will give us a so interesting talk about identifying bias in media. Go ahead, there, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, thank you for joining this global conference. I hope that you're enjoying it so far. And we will continue with quite a bit of wonderful content lined up for you. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick over here. So thank you, Baladev Prabhu. Once again, my name is Madan Gopal Das. I'm co-director of Iskcon Communications in North America, and our topic for this very short session is identifying elements of bias in media. I'll open with a short prayer from Srimad Bhagavatam. Yacchaktayo vadatam vadinam vai vivada sambada bhuvo bhavanti kurvanti chaisham muratma moham tasmai namo nanta gunaya bhumne. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the all-pervading Supreme Personality of Godhead, who possesses unlimited transcendental qualities. Acting from within the cores of the hearts of all philosophers who propagate various views, he causes them to forget their own souls, while sometimes agreeing and sometimes disagreeing among themselves. Thus he creates within this material world a situation in which they are unable to come to a conclusion. I offer my obeisances unto him. So, as leaders in Iskcon or as members in Iskcon, we need to look to various sources of information and news to help us make key practical decisions for our temples and our preaching activities. Things like, what will the weather like tomorrow, or if we should shut down our temples for any reason, or if we should cancel the Harinam session that we've planned for the weekend. It's important for us to know what's going on in the world, right? To operate as devotees. So we look to different sources of information. We have TV and search engines and social media. TV, of course, still remains the top source of news globally. But more and more we get our news from search engines like Google, and increasingly from social media like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and so many other places. So you can see how it's been changing over the last few years. And the credibility of these different channels. We know that certain news channels are more reliable, more credible, more truthful than others. And interestingly, but not surprisingly, the answer to which channel is considered more credible will depend on whom you ask. This is just one example. Here we see responses among Democrats. Fox News is way down at the bottom, and then among Republicans, it's considered the number one news channel. So, this is understandable. Everybody chooses to, prioritize what they think is more credible. But what do we do as devotees? So Srila Prabhupada, he wrote that the Krishna consciousness movement is for training men to be independently thoughtful and competent in all types of departments of knowledge and action. So it's important for us to know what is happening in the world around us, especially if it directly impacts our service in practicing and distributing Krishna consciousness. So there's a quote here: doubt everything or believe everything. These are two equally convenient strategies. Why? Because with either, we dispense with the need for reflection. So sometimes we may think it is better to just not believe anything at all. Just don't trust any news. And other people may tend to believe everything they hear without any discrimination. So both are cases of example of mental laziness. We need to be able to be thoughtful. But these two strategies, they put aside the need to be independently thoughtful. So on one end of the spectrum, we have utter gullibility, and on the other hand, we have total cynicism. So we need to strike a balance and be genuinely thoughtful devotees. So now we know that one of the four defects of a conditioned soul is the propensity to cheat. And the media out there, it takes this to a next level, the level of an art or a science. So what can we do? When reading the news, we should be thoughtful and learn to recognize how and where we are being misled. Then we can be better positioned to see through the deception and find the actionable information that we're looking for. So there are several types of media bias. I'm just mentioning a few of them here, and we'll go over a few examples, just so that we get an idea of what we're dealing with over here. So one is called spin. There's unsubstantiated claims, opinion statements presented as facts, sensationalism, emotionalism, mudslinging ad hominem, mind reading, slant, flawed logic, bias by omission. There's at least another 9 or 10 more, but we're just going to look at a few of them. So spin. Spin is a type of media bias that means the vague, dramatic, or sensational language is being used. When journalists put a spin on a story, they stray from the objective, measurable facts. Now, this term spin actually comes from an old term for advertisement agencies, where these very expert, wordsmiths, who they called spin doctors, would try to project the product of a company to be a lot more than it actually is, a lot bigger than it actually is. So some example of spin words that you see in the news: serious, crucial, high stakes, tirade, landmark. This is the latest in a string of, this is a major. So these are not objective words. They already are putting bias in your statement by saying this is a serious problem. As a journalist or as an objective person, I can't say that something is serious, really speaking, or it's critical, or someone turned up the heat. That's called putting a spin on the story. But we see these words so often, we almost tend to believe they're part of objectivity. And so we can recognize some of these words and see that, okay, maybe this person or this journalist is trying to tell me something that is beyond just the objective fact. There's another one called unsubstantiated claims. So now journalists sometimes make claims in their reporting without including evidence to back them up. So this can occur in the headline of an article or in the body of the article. Statements that appear to be fact but don't include specific evidence are a key indication of this kind of media bias. Just an example here, Senator Kamala Harris condemned the violent attack on actor Jussie Smollett, calling it an attempted modern-day lynching. Right? Later on, it turns out there was no violent attack. It was just alleged. It was just a story out there, and the whole thing was completely made up. So now, this article is making a statement. It's making a claim that's not been substantiated yet. So it's okay to call it alleged, but if you just make the statement as if it happened, then that's called unsubstantiated claim. Then another very, very common, very powerful, powerfully confusing bias is opinion stated as facts. So sometimes your journalists will use subjective language or statements under the guise of reporting objectively. Even when a media outlet presents the article that this is a news piece, or a factual, objective news piece, it may employ subjective statements or language. This one example, like the EPA is lifting greenhouse gas limits on coal power plants. So that's the headline. And then the subtitle there, the latest proposal won't stop the steady decline of the coal industry. So this is now their opinion. There are many other people who think that it will. It'll save the coal industry. But the writer of this news article is saying, no matter what, this is going to ruin the coal industry, or it's not going to help the coal industry. So this is another thing to watch out for. The problem is we're so used to just accepting everything as objective that we let some of these things slip. So it's good for us to be aware of different ways they're trying to lead us on. Then the fourth one we have is sensationalism. We've seen this quite a bit. It's a type of media bias in which information is presented in a way that gives a shock, makes a deep impression, often gives readers a false sense of culmination that all previous reporting has led to this ultimate story. So this kind of language is often dramatic, but also vague. It usually involves hyperbole. Hyperbole means like exaggeration at the expense of accuracy, or warping the reality to mislead or provoke a strong emotional reaction. Shocking, desperate, explosive. These are the kind of big headlines that newspapers like to put right in the front. Look at this. Read all about it. Something fishy. See, so want to grab your attention, appeal to the emotion, and it doesn't matter what the actual objective fact is that we're talking about. Now, this one is very common, and it's also very popular, I've seen, among discussions among devotees. It's called ad hominem bias. Ad hominem means to attack the other person, like to the person. It's an attack on a person's motive or character, instead of the content of their argument or idea. Ad hominem attack can be used overtly as a way to subtly discredit someone without having to engage the argument. Like here, there's an interview on Fox News by this author who wrote about the life and times of Jesus of Nazareth. And instead of talking about the book, the news host asked him, "Why are you writing about Jesus? You are a Muslim. We don't expect you to write about Jesus." Although the author has been studying, Christianity as a PhD for more than 20 years, and he's very qualified as an academic to write about this. But she's questioning him because he's a Muslim. So that's called ad hominem. So we have to be careful. And the other types of bias is mind reading, that occurs in journalism when a writer assumes that they know what the other person thinks, or thinks that the way they see the world reflects the way the world really is. So they will say that, okay, this particular president, it's obvious that this is what he's thinking. And they'll write that. But nobody knows how someone is thinking just based on one or two things that they may have said or done. And you can't make that assumption. So this is mind reading is also another common bias. Then slant is a type of bias that describes when journalists tell only a part of the story, or they highlight or focus on and play up a particular angle or one piece of information. And if there's like 6 different aspects of the whole event, but they keep focusing on only one of them and kind of downplay or even ignore the others, that's called slant. They cherry pick information or data to support one side to kind of force a conclusion and ignoring other perspectives. So slant prevents readers from getting the full story and narrows the scope of understanding. This is harder to see because we don't know what people left out. So there's something to keep in mind, another bias. And flawed logic. So flawed logic or faulty reasoning is a way to misrepresent people's opinions or to arrive at conclusions that are not justified by the given evidence. Flawed logic can involve jumping to conclusions or arriving at a conclusion that doesn't follow from the premise. And this one example over here. This is about this time last year, and they're saying Joe Biden has been president for 9 hours and 400,000 Americans are dead from COVID or something like that, right? So what's the logic? What's the point of putting those 2 things together? Because he became president in 9 hours, 400,000 people died. So it doesn't have any connection, but they put things together. There's bias by omission. That means you totally omit certain things. You choose not to cover certain stories entirely, or you omit major parts of the story to support an alternative viewpoint, omit voices, perspectives. So this is just a sampling of 9 types of bias in the media. There are many, many more. You can do some search on these different kinds of bias. There's lots of articles, there's lots of books out there if you're interested in it, if you find this an interesting topic. This is also very useful when we are dealing with conversations with other devotees. But this is in particular about media literacy, because we have a practical need to access information from the media. just to function. But we should be very sharp and independently thoughtful, like Srila Prabhupada has asked us to do. So I'm just going to present a couple of final remarks about bias. That everyone is biased. It is part of human nature to have perspectives and preferences and prejudices, leanings and partialities. But sometimes bias, especially media bias, can become invisible to us because they're so good at it. But when we are aware of the various types of deceptive media practices, we can make more educated decisions on what to believe and how to deal with various perspectives, all these different angles. And more importantly, we can also learn to identify any tendencies or habits in ourselves that may lean towards this deception, because we may even unwillingly be doing this. It's a type of intellectual dishonesty, and we get so much in the habit of it. So can we identify in our own communications, when I write a newsletter to our congregation, when I'm making a statement on WhatsApp about our temple, am I being objective? So we have to identify these tendencies and habits in ourselves that may lead toward deception and target them for removal as part of our own communications, as well as our personal spiritual growth. It'll improve our level of trust among our own members, and our own people that we communicate with. And it'll make us a lot sharper when we run to recognize this, and we can point them out and seek objectivity when we can. So thank you all very much for listening carefully, and we'll end over here. And if there are any question discussion, we'll bring those up towards the end when we have a special time set for discussions. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Jai. Thank you, Madam Gopal Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Now let me introduce who, for many of us, is our mentor and inspiration for this service of communication. His Grace Anutama Prabhu, our Global Minister of Communications, who will give us an overview of communication in Iskcon with his talk titled, Why Iskcon Communications? So, Anutama Prabhu, please.
Hare Krishna, thank you, Baladev Prabhu. And thank you to all the devotees who have joined us for this important conference today. And I believe Radhika Ramana is still with us in the background. Special thanks to Radhika Ramana Prabhu. It was wonderful, thought-provoking opening session for our conference. And also thanks to Madam Gopal Prabhu for your analysis of bias, and especially your comments at the end about we need to be careful about our own biases, and especially for speaking slowly as a reminder to me that this is being translated into both Russian and Spanish. So I will also try to keep the pace reasonable. So I wanted to do a little bit of an oversight. Why Iskcon Communications? Why is this important for us to be involved in this field, and for devotees to be trained with some basic communication principles? We know since our movement was started by Srila Prabhupada in 1966, there's been significant growth. These numbers are a few years old, so they're even larger than this now, but as an overview, 650 plus temples, so many farm and eco villages, 110 plus vegetarian restaurants, 500, probably close to 550 million books distributed, 9 million people worshiping our temples, and many have said that's a conservative figure, 3 billion plates of prasadam, 4,000 home programs, Bhakti Viksha groups. We are a large organization, a community. And we've attracted major attention, appreciation of political leaders. This is Prime Minister Vajpayee, former Prime Minister, who said the voyage of Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada to the United States in 1965 and the spectacular popularity his movement gained in a very short spell of 12 years must be regarded as one of the greatest spiritual events of the century. That's a very significant amount of recognition for Prabhupada. Scholars as well, Tom Hopkins, who passed away recently, wrote that Prabhupada was a genuine holy person with enormous integrity and compassion. He had a powerful impact on those who met him. He never claimed authority and respect for himself. What he said and did was always in the name of Krishna. So also there's been so much recent media attention to the society. A couple of years ago, Iskcon hosting the world's largest Bhagavad Gita. The UK Prime Minister visiting Iskcon temple, Bhaktivedanta Manor. In fact, two prime ministers have recently visited the Bhaktivedanta Manor. Iskcon temples attacked in Bangladesh. That certainly achieved a lot of international attention. So people are aware of us. So Iskcon's no longer an anomaly in the world in many ways. We've received UN recognition for the Govardhan Eco Village, just as an example. We've taken, we can see Radhika Ramana Prabhu's, his contributions to us. He's published so many important books, as have many other Iskcon scholars that are gaining attention and notoriety and having an impact on the way scholars and academics look upon the world and look upon Gaudiya Vaishnavism and Hinduism in general, for sure. We have temples and restaurants in major cities worldwide. TOVP is going to be opening soon, 2023, 2024. But at the same time, we have to recognize we remain mostly unknown. I flew through the New York airport a couple of years ago in my dhoti and tilak. My wife was there with her sari, and a policeman asked me, "Who are you? Why are you dressed like that?" I was shocked. I thought, we started in New York. How can a New York policeman not know who we are? So I asked these questions. How many Iskcon leaders know the name of their local mayor or member of parliament? What to speak of meeting them or going to their events? How many of our leaders and communities were involved in at least one major local public event, local? In other words, we're invited to their events. How many of us, how many of our leaders could host an event with 25 VIPs that we know outside of our congregation or our Hindu friends? Have we built those kind of relationships? Most places, I feel not. So then we have to look to our example, Srila Prabhupada. Here's just a partial list of, and I've been reading Shyamasundar Prabhu's book recently, the last volume of Chasing Rhinos with the Swami. Also Giriraj Maharaj's book. Someday some PhD candidate's going to do a study of all the people that Prabhupada met, especially in VIPs. Here's just a few. 2 prime ministers, the Home Minister of India, Brahmananda Reddy, the Governor General of India, and the Governor of UP. There's a picture of Prabhupada meeting Lal Bahadur Shastri before he even went to the West. More people. I won't read all the names. The Governor of Uttar Pradesh, the Governor of Tamil Nadu, another Governor of Tamil Nadu, the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, another Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, the Mayor of Geneva in Switzerland. I think he also met the Mayor of Paris, if I remember correctly. Of course, famous photo, Srila Prabhu, George Harrison, and his wife, Dhananjaya Prabhu. Prabhupada knew and met George Harrison, John Lennon, Allen Ginsberg, the poet. Bishop Kelly was a bishop of the Catholic Church in Victoria, Australia. Sterling Moss, a famed Formula One race car driver. Article in Science of Self-Realization. Chicago Police Department, Lieutenant Mosley. Here's Prabhupada meeting an academic when he was in Europe. Again, continuing the list, members of the US Senate he met, J.K. Birla, very leading businessman, industrialist, Chief Justice of the Tamil Nadu High Court, Professor Joseph O'Connell, and many other professors, and many, many more. And some of you may know, most of you may know, who else did Prabhupada write to? Prabhupada wrote so many letters. Here's one, which he started. Please accept my humble obeisances at your lotus feet. I beg to introduce myself as an Indian monk. That's how Prabhupada started his letter to Pope Paul VI in 1968, asking him if we can meet and work together to promote God consciousness around the world. So why? We have to ask ourselves, why did Prabhupada do this? We put so much emphasis, which we should. Prabhupada opened so many temples. Prabhupada translated and pushed his disciples to distribute his books in so many languages all around the world. Prabhupada established high standards of deity worship. So many wonderful things that Prabhupada did, Sankirtan in the streets. But Prabhupada also made it a priority to reach out and interact with so many people. Something that we, at least many places in Iskcon, we fail to prioritize. Although we become so big, 50 plus some years in, we're still not prioritizing this part of what Prabhupada did. So that's my question to all of us. Why? And what should we do about it? Here's a wonderful letter to Tejas Prabhu in August 1973. And Prabhupada wrote, if you make some of the big government officials interested in our movement, then our strength will increase. Because we are in the material world, sometimes we require that help. Another point is that if a government officer becomes our admirer or member, then many others will follow. So try to make them sympathizers. So here he's emphasizing if we just make important people interested in our movement, if they become our admirers, they just appreciate what we're doing, what to speak of becoming members, how much it will benefit our society. So he says, try to make them sympathizers. So this is the example Prabhupada gave us. Try to make them sympathizers, and we're meant to follow in his footsteps. So our goal, thinking in this terms of why communications, our goal is we want to create a Sankirtan-friendly world. We want to understand how do we interact with people, key audiences. Most of us are familiar with that term. Those groups or individuals that can help us the most or hurt us the most as a society, whether that's government, media, our neighbors, parents of devotees, academics, religious leaders. All these different people can really have a powerful impact on creating a world or impacting the world that will either welcome and appreciate our contributions or sometimes try to block those contributions, or at the very least, not appreciate those. So we want to understand who are these key audiences and build mutually beneficial relationships with them. This is so critical to the communications ministry work. Oftentimes there's a tendency to think, I need to go meet someone because they can help me. But we have to also understand it's a two-way street. We need to also make contributions to what other people's priorities are. Sometimes I find devotees, they'll attend, say, an interfaith meeting for their first time with the idea that I'm going to go tell them about Krishna because they don't understand who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But if we want to share our understandings of Krishna, our understandings of the purpose of life, we also need to go in with a humble mood, as Lord Chaitanya did, and as Srila Prabhupada exampled for us, and so many other acharyas, Bhaktivinoda Thakur especially, with the understanding that we also can, especially us, as followers, as servants, we can learn from others. And when we have that open mindset of building mutually beneficial relationships and learning from others as much as we share, at the very least, we can learn the same. Then there can be so much advantage in our outreach. So just to remind these, what we always refer to our 5 principles of communications. We need to be consistent with Prabhupada's teaching and example. And I noticed among many wonderful things Radhika Ramana Prabhu presented, this idea, his first principle, that we need to understand truth, understand the Shastra in relationship to the full writings and the examples given by our acharyas and especially Srila Prabhupada. So this is an important principle in communications. We look at what Prabhupada said, and we look at what Prabhupada wrote, and we look at what Prabhupada did and how he himself applied the core teachings that he gave to us. Second principle is the need to be proactive. Understanding, just as Srila Prabhupada was so proactive. When he was in the UK, if you read Shyamasundar Prabhu's books, Prabhupada was so enthused to have his disciples reach out and bring important people to come and meet him, reach out and have a chance to build these relationships with people who can help his mission. I just read recently the constable in, I guess it's Leshmore Heath, the village just adjacent to Bhaktivinoda Manor. His name was Harry, and this is a local policeman. And they brought Harry to meet Srila Prabhupada. And they had such a warm exchange and relationship. Harry was explaining that he lived right across the street from the gate of the temple, Bhaktivinoda Manor. And he commented that people in the village were saying they've got Harry on one side and the Harrys on the other side. And everyone, including Srila Prabhupada, laughed to that. And Prabhupada said to him, he said, yes, Prabhupada laughed with that. And then the man said, if you have any difficulties, please contact me so I can assist you in whatever way possible. And Prabhupada told him, yes, we are continuing under your protection. Prabhupada took that humble mood in relationship to this local constable, not a big guy in terms of the British government, but certainly important in terms of the Bhaktivedanta Manor's existence with Letchworth Heath village residents. So Prabhupada took a very proactive stance in meeting him and building relationship and really taking like such a humble position. Yes, sir, we are under your protection. So being proactive, considering time, place, and circumstance, the third principle we have, and Radhika Ramana will emphasize that also in his talk, building mutually beneficial relationships, win-win. Doing communications means when we meet the neighbors, how can we help them? How can they help us? And this final one, very important, exemplary character and behavior. We know we live in a world that's plagued by religious actors who think that their philosophy alone is sufficient, that they can do anything they want. And our Iskcon society has a sacred duty to show that that's the opposite of what we believe. We actually are very, very concerned about having exemplary character and behavior. One, because we're supposed to, and two, because people will not take us seriously if we're hypocritical. So just like there's so many endeavors now, with Iskcon Environmental Initiative, Iskcon's efforts to address, abuse within our communities, we need to, as far as possible, we're all human, we will have problems as a community, but as far as possible to make sure we're walking our talk. A couple other quotes from Prabhupada. One qualification is daksha. He must be very expert in doing things very nicely. Not that because one is a Vaishnava, he will be callous in worldly things. No, not that, quote, I have become a Vaishnava, let everything be stolen or spoiled or broken. I cannot care. That is not my consideration. So Prabhupada is instructing us as devotees, we need to be very careful that do everything very properly. Not that we think, oh, I'm a devotee, it doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter if I'm kind to my neighbors. It doesn't matter if I'm respectful to the government officials. It doesn't matter if I follow the laws strictly. I'm a devotee. That's not what Prabhupada taught us. Here we see Prabhupada reaching out. If those of you have seen this wonderful interview, I believe this was in San Francisco, and Prabhupada really melted the heart of this reporter in this exchange. So what do we do? It starts with vision. Iskcon as a society, we have major contributions to make. We know we're doing so much with building temples and bringing individuals into the Gaudiya Vaishnava fold. That's wonderful. And we also have other contributions to make. I listed a few. Interreligious dialogue, religious freedom issues. We've got a lot to say about the importance of religious freedom. Tato Brahma Jignasa. It's a core principle for Gaudiya Vaishnavas that having acquired the human form of life, it's essential everyone has the opportunity to inquire about God. Environmental issues, social issues like health, diversity. We're not the body. Who's got more to say about diversity than us? Ethical issues, leadership issues, and local issues. All of us have local issues that our Gaudiya Vaishnava principles can help us weigh in on. So what can you do? What can we all do? 4 easy steps. Some of us are very active in communications. Some of us hopefully will be inspired to take a more active part. Get trained how to do communications work properly. There are disciplines and teachings and skills to learn. The Iskcon communications course is available online. It just so happens it's starting again in 2 days on Monday, just January 24th. You can go to the Bhaktivedanta College online and you can sign up. The course starts on Monday. There's lots of information there. It's very flexible. You get workloads, videos to listen to. You can do it anytime during the week. You don't have to tune in at a certain day or a certain time. Get connected. There are regional communications directors, North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, India, Australasia. Get connected so you can be part of this team. Develop a strategy, working with these regional directors as well as your local authorities to identify who are the key audiences, who's the most important people in our part of the world who can help us or who can hurt us in our mission. Develop a strategy, how to work with those people and build relationships, and then get going. Make a plan, be proactive, and think win-win. 4 easy steps: get trained, get connected, get a strategy, and get going. And we're here to help you. We've got networking and support. There's the Iskcon, a global team training I just mentioned. We have with our communications course. Go to isconcommunications.org. That's our website with information about so many resources that are there. Isconcommunications.org. Iskcon News, you're going to hear more about that in just a few minutes. A wonderful resource for all of us to take advantage that strengthens our communities locally and globally. So many wonderful things we're producing. Mahaprabhu, Communications Director in Europe, has revitalized the Iskcon Communications Journal. New volume of that came out this year. We have media kits. We have a wonderful interface statement. It's been there for a decade, a beautiful statement that top scholars in religious studies have said this is far better than some of the largest religious communities in the world have. We have service descriptions about communications work. We have startup kits. And just like this is our online conference, we have global and regional conferences. So in communications, we always talk about be proactive and remember the Krishna factor, which we depend upon Krishna. We pray to him, we knock on the door, we open the door in a humble frame of mind, and we see what magic the Lord works in our outreach work. As Prabhupada wrote in the Jalajuta, we'll close us with this prayer. My dear Lord Krishna, you're so kind upon this useless soul, but I do not know why you have brought me here. Now you can do whatever you like with me. Somehow or other, O Lord, you have brought me here to speak about you. Now, my Lord, it is up to you to make me a success or failure as you like. O Lord, I'm just like a puppet in your hands. So if you have brought me here to dance, make me dance, make me dance. O Lord, make me dance as you like. Signed, the most unfortunate, most insignificant beggar, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, on board the ship Jaladuta, Boston, September 1965. And please remember our secret mantra always, we must always think in terms of others' needs, interest, and concerns. And if we do so, the walls to communications fall down and we can build wonderful relationships to the benefit of others, to the benefit of our society, to the benefit of our mission. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So I'll end there. Thank you very much. And there'll be sometimes later, if there are any general questions, we'll have time for that at the end of our next couple sessions. We bundled the question and answer time together. So thank you, Baladev. I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Nutama Prabhu, by your interesting vision of Iskcon communication. Now is the turn of a new young talent in our global team, Kamala Radha Prabhu. She is the manager and editor of the new Iskcon news site, and she will talk to us about it with her presentation, Iskcon News, new website update, editorial, focus, and how to contribute. Please, dear Kamala, go ahead.
Hare Krishna Prabhus, Hare Krishna everyone. Thank you for allowing me to talk today. I will be brief, but I will also be trying to speak slower so that people can translate. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. So some of this is going to be repetitive of some of the things that you've heard already, but I'm going to start with what is news in general. So news is a part of communication. It keeps us informed of events and issues. News may be interesting or even entertaining at times, but its main utility is to inform. So what is Iskcon News? So as we briefly put, it is already defined, Iskcon News is part of Iskcon Communications. So Iskcon News stands as the official news agency for our society. So we inform devotees about official decisions, documents, announcements, events, things like this. But we are becoming so much more for you. We are you. We are your voice. We want to become more than just a bulletin board for you, which is essential, but we want to be more. We want to reflect what's relevant in your lives. Also, because we are one of the first websites people find when they're searching for Iskcon, This means we also have a lot of non-devotees that are visiting and reading as well. So we are working on making content for both internal devotee community, but also in a clear voice for external reach as well. And I'm going to skip some examples for now because I know we're short on time. So all that being said, let's look at the last year of Iskcon News. So over the last year, our core group has met every week to help build our brand and present it to you. Our new website that you can see here is just the start of things to come. And speaking of websites, at this point, I would like to give my sincere appreciation to our international news syndicate with Baladev Prabhu and our Spanish-speaking Iskcon News, Iskcon Noticias, and Bakhtin Olisia running the Russian Iskcon News, which can be found on Facebook. So besides the website, let's talk about some of the new projects, and they are coming soon. And when I say coming soon, I mean they are already in development. We have coming at you, we have news, video news reports, audio, podcasts, and even a whole new food section that's coming that will be a lot more than just recipes. In fact, we have 3 developed right now, 3 different cooking demos. And so please follow us on social media because that's where those will be released. And speaking of social media, let's have a look at some of the impact that we've done so far. So Iskcon News has existed on social media platforms, but they were kind of being underutilized for a while. But over the last 2 years, they have grown considerably if you look at those numbers. Facebook currently has over 140,000 followers. Twitter is at 21K, and Instagram went from 280 followers in April 2020 when I took over, and now it's grown to over 3,000, which is very good organic growth. And here are some of the people responsible for that. And what started out as a humble group of dedicated devotees has now grown into a full news agency, and it is continuing to grow every day. So I will start here with Anutama Prabhu. As we know, he's our editor-in-chief and the Minister of Communications. Then you have David Prasta Prabhu, who's a development and IT manager. Then I currently am the managing editor and social media director. Then we have Kumari Kunti, who is the creative director and co-president of Communications North America. We have Ajita Prabhu, for some of you that were at our last conference last weekend, who's head of fundraising and special events. And then new to our team, we have Kalyana Giriraj Prabhu, head of the Iskcon newsletter, and he is also our official European correspondent. And we also have Govinda Sindor Prabhu, who is our main graphic designer and head of graphics. Most of you are in attendance today, so make sure you wave and say hi. And I just want to take one moment to highlight 2 very important devotees. I would like us all to give thanks and appreciation to Krishna Leela Dasi and Madhava Smolan for their years and years of dedicated service to Iskcon News. Iskcon News would not be what it is today without them really paving the way for us. So that brings me to, where did you go? Go back, go back. Oh, it won't go back, but that's okay. It's okay. What's next for us? Well, what's next for us is we want you. Simply put, we want you, but not only do we want you, we need you because you are Iskcon News. It is such a fun service. And to be honest with you, it's really not that hard. If you have something to say, say it. If you have something to report, report it. If you have an idea for a story, but you're not exactly sure how to get it started, that's okay. Email me. We have reporters, we have writers that can take it on for you. If you found a picture on social media about some devotee initiative or run business that you would like to know more about, you could just send us that picture and I will assign that project to one of our writers, and we'll get the story out. But even before, not only just that, but not just on the content end, we have so many more teams building on a regular basis. So we currently have teams in search engine optimization. We have now a graphics department. We're ramping up our video production. We could always use more people for that. We want you. We want you to become Iskcon News. And unfortunately, the last picture was a screenshot of our summer intern program, but we also have this video that we want to share. And I do apologize for the sound quality. It might not be great, but it's just a little example of what it's like to work for Iskcon News. So I'm just going to put that on right now.
Hi, Krishna. Thanks for reading Iskcon News. We hope it brings you closer to Srila Prabhupada and his society for more steady progress.
I really like about working for Iskcon News is that we really try hard to get international coverage for an international society. I like that you could go on and within a week can see stories from Nairobi, Melbourne, Florence, Italy, Scotland, Bangladesh.
Get involved with Iskcon News. Tell us about your heroes in your community. Tell us about the events and festivities and the new innovative ways that you're reaching out to people. Send us clips, send us pics, write articles. We will broadcast with the rest of the Iskcon world to inspire others the way that you're inspiring your community.
I really like how they provide authentic information about what is happening in the worldwide community. I'm writing for Iskcon News and really like the unique way of broadcasting each and every news.
Hi, I'm a contributing writer for Iskcon News. I love Iskcon News because everyone is so supportive, cooperative, and efficient at the same time. I am Iskcon.
So I thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but I thank everyone. And I hope you found this short talk interesting and inspiring. And I hope by tomorrow I have a full inbox of questions and different story ideas. And you can reach me directly at editor@iskcon.org. And just as we put last week in our North American conference, it's iskconnews.org, iskconnews.org, iskconnews.org. This is a very creative and contagious service. So I beg you, give us a try. Okay, thank you all. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Kamala Radha Prabhu, by your exciting presentation. So we invite all of you to subscribe our Iskcon News social networks and Iskcon Noticias Español, Spanish sites, and of course, submit your articles to be published. So we have the last talk for this meeting. Let me now introduce Bhaktadas Prabhu, Director of Communication for Australasia, and Yudhishthir Govinda Prabhu, Director of Communication for India, who will give us an overview of what happened in Bangladesh with the attack on our temples, with his presentation called What, Why, Lesson and Achievements. Go ahead there, Prabhus.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. I was on mute, unfortunately. I think we'll start off first off with Yudhishthir Govinda Prabhu, who will explain what actually happened and India's contribution to this atrocity that happened in Bangladesh. And then I've asked my colleague, actually, Sri Ram, to go a little further into what happened in Australia. And then I'll just summarize at the end how it actually eventuated worldwide, this campaign for Bangladesh. So if I can hand it over to Yudhishthir Govinda to start it off, and then we'll continue with Sri Ram. Thanks, Baladev.
I'm sharing on your behalf, Yudhishthir Govinda Prabhu, so just tell me when you're ready to go to the next slides.
Yudhishthir got bumped somehow. I just let him in again. So I know he's in a place his connection is not so
Yeah.
good. So I hope with this now.
Here we go.
Okay,
Yes.
we've got your presentation up, Prabhu, so just tell us as you need to move the slides on.
He may not be with us. Yeah, he's saying now he just sent a text. He's not able to unmute. So can somebody help him on that?
Yeah, Hare Krishna, thank you. And I apologize for the technical glitch. I'm little in a remote area outside of Hyderabad, so the network wasn't very stable. So I apologize for that. Yeah, I've had some very wonderful presentations so far, and all of them were dealing with many, many different aspects of communications. But as all of us know, that one of the challenges of being a communication devotee is also to deal with the crisis communications, which, and especially in the time and age that we are living in, is more often than not. So we all remember and perhaps even participated in our response to the Bangladesh attacks that happened a few months back. So we'll be structuring this presentation in two ways, between the context of Bangladesh and the Indian subcontinent and the way this whole thing was responded to by our international community across the world. So first, let me start off by putting in a little context to our discussion. Nandu, could you move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the Durga Puja time, which is just prior to the Diwali festival, is a very important function and a time period for the Bengali Hindus. And it was during this time that a series of Durga pandals had come up all over the country. And eventually these were the same Durga pandals that got attacked. So what had happened was basically that, at least that's the initial news that came out, was they found a copy of Quran in the hands of Durga Devi and Lord Ganesha's lap. And somehow the radical elements jumped on that and eventually started attacking all the Hindu establishments, the temples. And as per the media reports, over 120 places were attacked and 10 people were killed and 150 were injured. Now, these are the conservative estimates. And later on, when the police investigated the matter, it was found out that a member of the majority community had intentionally placed the Quran in the lap of Durga Devi to create a unrest in the community. And unfortunately, what had happened was 2 of our devotees were brutally killed, and our temple in Noakhali, which is in the Chittagong division, was attacked. And now these attacks have been something that has been going on in Bangladesh for quite some time. But what happened in this period of 10, 12 days was unprecedented in the recent times, because no one could remember a scale of attack this deadly in the last many, many years. So can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah, so this is some of the photographs of our Noakhali temple. On the right, you see is a photograph of Partha Das, one of our devotees who was unfortunately killed, and his body was dumped in a pond next to the temple. Next, please. And again, they vandalized the temple hall, bookstore, the Prasadam hall. And actually, when the attacks took place, the devotees were just about to honor Prasad, and they had to rush out and try to defend and protect the deities, protect temple properties and the devotees. Next. So the first thing that the Bangladesh leadership did was to get in touch with our global communications minister, Anutama Prabhu. He in turn roped all of us in. And the first line of action that we had was to create awareness within the establishment, the government, the media, and other such agencies. So we immediately started reaching out to our friends in the media, contacting different journalists, putting together a press release and sending it out to them. And what this did was it created a trickle effect, and eventually, within a span of 2 or 3 days, all the global news agencies, Reuters, AFP, New York Times, Washington Post, and all the Indian news channels started picking up. Several of my colleagues on this conference here today from different parts of India, representing Iskcon Communications, played a very vital role in creating the sensitivity among the masses. Next. And finally, one of our major action items was putting together the global Kirtan protest, which many of you kindly participated and made it a success. And within India, we had about 100 cities and towns who participated in the program. Now, originally, we wanted to do a big, 5,000, 10,000 devotee kind of a protest, but due to the COVID regulations and rules that were in place in India, we couldn't really get that size and scale. But nevertheless, what really mattered was the intention and the mood with which the devotees went out to show solidarity with the minorities and the Hindus of Bangladesh. Next. So these are just some photographs from different parts of India, Orissa. You could keep scrolling through. And this is from Delhi. You would also see a Jain monk here amidst us. And these are some more sadhus from the city of Varanasi. Next. This is Pune. And in some places like here in this photograph, this is from the state of Karnataka, where our devotees, the regional secretaries in the center, Sudhir Chaitanya Prabhu, had called on the governor of the state, requesting him in turn to place a request with the government of India to diplomatically intervene and speak to the government of Bangladesh. Next. And a little bit of what happened in Bangladesh as a response as well. The first thing that we did was we started reaching out to the community which were affected, giving them, because many of them had their houses burned down, their offices burned down, so they didn't even have the basic necessities for their survival. So we started giving them raw materials for cooking, or in some places even cooked meals and clothing and so on. Yes. And the second thing we did was to unite all the minority community. So in Bangladesh, they have something called as the Hindu, Buddhist, Christian Unity Council. And Iskcon is a very important and vital part of that council. So we got everyone together and tried to organize demonstrations in collaboration with the government to sensitize what has been happening there and to request government to take strong action to bring the perpetrators to justice and to restore peace in the community. And Iskcon led countrywide marches in many parts of Bangladesh. So this one is from Chittagong, where we had a march of 50,000 people. 25,000 of them were Iskcon devotees who were driven down from different parts of Bangladesh in buses. And it really created impact in the society. And not just the minorities, but also the majority community started feeling that what happened was not right. And they came out in support. Many Muslim community leaders, the imams, they all started showing their solidarity with us. Yes, bro. Yeah, these are some more photographs from different parts of Chittagong. So this was a briefly a summary presentation of what happened in Bangladesh and what we did in India and what we had also done in Bangladesh. And subsequently later, as a result of all the global efforts of our communication devotees, of our other devotees from different parts of the world, we had the Bangladesh ambassador to India visit us in Delhi to discuss way forward and to express the government's viewpoints on what they are looking at and how they want to move forward. And they also heard our viewpoint as well. So it was a very constructive dialogue that we had with the ambassador, which he said he would pass on to the government. So with that, I'll invite Bhakta Prabhu to give us a global perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Yudhishthira Prabhu. Can I just call on Sri Ram now to just make a little introduction as to what happened in our region in Australia. Australia was the first region that actually took to the protests seeing as how our world situation, where we're situated, we had the first opportunity to start doing protests in Australia. So I'll just hand it over to Sriram Prabhu, my colleague, and then I'll just finish with a summary, if that's okay. Thank you. Sriram?
He might be muted.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. It's already 1:30 a.m. in the night. So, it's a very late night for us in Australia, or maybe you can say a very early morning, because Prabhupada used to wake up at this time. So either way, it is a bit austere for me and even for Bhakta Prabhu. So I'll start Hare Krishna. So my name is Sri Ram Das from Melbourne, Australia. So I'm here to present a report on the global peaceful Kirtan protest that we did in Australasia region. And thank you, Yudhishthir Prabhu, for such a nice elaboration on what happened in Bangladesh and India. So what I'm going to present is a add-on to what Yudhishthir Prabhu already mentioned. So I would like to just share a quote from Srila Prabhupada that, Prabhupada, this is just one of them. Prabhupada stated many times that, even though devotees are peace-loving people, they must stand against the miscreants when the situation arises. So unfortunately, such a situation arose in October last year. And as a result, Iskcon has to stand up. So basically, during last October in Bangladesh, a heinous act was conducted against the Hindu minorities, and they were beaten, raped, and killed, and temples were vandalized and destroyed, and most importantly, the deities were burned. And on top of it, there are the many people killed, and two of the Iskcon devotees were among those killed, as Yudhishthira Prabhu already mentioned. So to keeping this in mind, and the other thing is that, government took no action or very little action to control the attacks. As a result, there were the further attacks continued for another 9 days. That is actually a shame, And in response to that, Iskcon basically decided to do the global Kirtan protest on 23rd of October. So Australia was the first country to start the protest because of the geographical location. And even though New Zealand geographically ahead of Australia, they did the protest a week later. So in Melbourne, basically, we conducted the protest 25 key locations across the Melbourne city. And in Sydney, the protest was conducted at the iconic Sydney Opera House. And in Adelaide, they did the Kirtan March from Parliament till the Victoria Square, which is the popular location in the Adelaide city. And in Australian capital city, Canberra, the protest was performed at the Parliament House. And apart from that, the protests were conducted in New Zealand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore, and a few other places. So through these protests, the Iskcon, along with the Hindu organizations, interfaith groups and all, basically approached the Bangladeshi government via the local representatives to take swift action to control the violence and take some tangible steps to go for the safety of the Hindu and other minorities. And certainly, collectively, it created a huge pressure on the Bangladesh government to act. So at this point, I would like to extend my thanks to the Iskcon communications team, local temple management, and all the devotees who stood up in this protest. So I now pass on to Bhakta Prabhu to give a global viewpoint of the overall protest.
Thanks, Ram, and thanks, Yudhisthira Govinda Prabhus. So, as you can see, basically speaking, the worldwide International Society for Krishna Consciousness community was shocked and saddened by those series of violent events directly against the Hindu minorities in Bangladesh, including in temples and members, and hence the international protest campaign began. Iskcon, in collaboration with other religious minorities, called upon the Bangladeshi government, as Yudhisthira was mentioning, to take swift action to bring an end to the violence against minorities in a spirit of unity. And this is the importance of developing really good connection with interfaith groups, as Anuttama Prabhu was mentioning before. Massive protests were organized by the Hindu, Buddhist, Christian unity, of which Iskcon is an active member, as mentioned by Yudhisthira Prabhu. Events were held in all major parts of Bangladesh. Again, was pointed out, protesters demanded that the perpetrators of violence be accountable and that the safety of the Bangladeshi minorities be assured. My colleagues have already mentioned this. In other parts of the world, protests were staged in support of Bangladeshi Hindus and other minorities, which had great impact on the situation. More than 100 Iskcon organized events took place across the globe in a very short matter of time, and thousands participated peacefully, chanting while holding signs and pleading for protection and justice for these minorities in Bangladesh. Iskcon was with centers in every part of the world, could motivate action on a world scale. This is the uniqueness of our society. Iskcon, as was mentioned before, has connections throughout the whole world. And when an issue like this happened, they could straight away go into action. The United Kingdom took a lot of initiative with many protests. 500 devotees and supporters gathered and chanted and danced in front of the Bangladeshi High Commissioner. Prime Minister and other members of Parliament offered their protest in Parliament. Europe was also an epicenter for numerous protest events from Finland to Italy. In Brussels, the devotees protested and met the Bangladeshi ambassador. In Italy, protests were held in Florence and Rome in front of the embassy, and they had an hour-long meeting with the ambassador. In Africa, there were protests in the cities like Durban and media coverage and a meeting with the ambassador of Mauritius, in Mauritius. In Canada, there were prayer vigils which took place from coast to coast, from Vancouver to Halifax. In the US, protests were held in major capital cities with great effect and attention. For example, in New York, the devotees took to chanting in front of the White House, also chanting in Times Square and at Washington, DC. And some members of Congress also spoke out about these atrocities. In Latin America, also many protested this injustice in places like Buenos Aires in Argentina. From this most tragic event, the major lessons we can learn are, as devotees interested in Iskcon communications, Iskcon worldwide collectively can pack a powerful punch on the world stage. We saw Iskcon taking a major lead in coordinating these protests, and all the interfaith groups and the Hindu groups were so appreciative of Iskcon's direct action. Directly in India, Europe, Americas, Africa, and the Asian regions, powerful messages of protest to this injustice were heard loud and clear by those in power around the world. As individuals, like all of us are, who are participating in this conference, and we're all interested in international communications, we should all be aware of this fact and be ready to motivate our voices on issues we as a society feel need to be broadcast loud and clear. Iskcon International is no longer a minority organization. We can, in time, as Srila Prabhupada predicted, be world leaders that can influence and change the world for the better. Finally, members of Iskcon Communication Network team offer our sincere prayers and condolences to the families of those who have lost their lives and livelihoods in such violent and painful circumstances as what happened there in Bangladesh. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Bhakta Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Some final words by Anuttama Prabhu and me, dear Vaishnavas. We are very grateful for all the energy all of you have put into this conference. Practically all of you has been present during the entire conference. We have an average of 100 devotees throughout the conference, in addition to the devotees who has been present on the Russian and Spanish networks. Thank you for your time and dedication, not just now, but along the year in your respective kshetras of service. Together we hope to please Srila Prabhupada and his mission of communicating this sublime message to the humanity. So, Anuttama Prabhu.
We also have a few questions, like a short question and answers section, okay? So the first question would be, we actually have a couple of questions for Anuttama Prabhu. And the first one is, how can we stay publicly and institutionally politically neutral while at the same time making friends with the political party or parties in power? So this one
Thank
is
you.
for
That's a really
Anuttama
important
Prabhu.
question. Yeah, thank you. That's a very important question. First of all, as individual members of our various, countries and societies, some of us may be politically not involved at all. Some of us may be very strongly feeling, I believe in this party or that party, and that's fine. We have nothing to say about anybody's individual political affiliation. That's up to you. But to the extent that we're representing Iskcon as Iskcon communications representatives or local leaders, we absolutely must remain neutral in any political situation. From a practical point of view, we know whoever's in power today, 5-10 years from now, there'll be somebody else in power. And so that's just one very practical reason that we should do that. And as communicators and as a religious community, we need to work with whoever is in government power. We need to get a Rathiatra permit, whether it's, the liberals or the conservatives, whether it's the Green Party or the Red Party or the this or that, whatever the differences may be in our places. When we are, when we're invited to special events, we need to have relationships with various people. In rare occasions, I would say rare, there may be a political leader who is so personally corrupt. They're all kind of somewhat corrupt. It's the age of Kali, after all. But there may be some individuals who are so personally corrupt that we've seen with them. That's very, very generally, if someone is said, we should respect people who have, positions of authority, and we should learn to work with people. There's always something that we can find in common. Like in the United States, the Republican Party that a lot of people criticize, they're also very strong on some social conservative issues that we may agree with. The Democratic Party, which many people criticize very strongly, they're also aligned with many of our values about the environment and different things like that. So we can look for some common areas of interest, but we should always maintain our neutrality as an institution. If for no other reason that it puts us at risk, I know in the country where I live, United States, if you're aligned with a political party, you lose your religious status. You're no longer tax exempt and all kinds of things like that. So that's yet another reason why we should maintain our neutrality and be very, very careful and attentive to that. I hope that clarifies. That's a short answer to an important question. And Alessi, I tried to speak slowly, although it's one of the things I do poorly.
I don't think that was too slow, Anuttama Prabhu. That was a bit quick. But
that's what I said. I tried.
Yes.
I tried, but it's not.
We know we are so thankful. We are so thankful for your efforts. We also wanted to ask you about the Srila Prabhupada commemorate coins. Could you tell us a few words about that?
Yeah, let's let Yudhisthira speak about that if his connection is still good, or Bhakta Prabhu or Banagopal. They've really headed this up.
Yes, if it's Yudhisthira Prabhu, we also have a question for him. We would like him to give an update. Our listeners are asking about an update on the current situation current status in Bangladesh. We had a few questions on that, so perhaps Yudhishthir Govinda Prabhu, if you are online, if you could tell us about Bangladesh, current situation, and Srila Prabhupada commemorate coins, please.
Sure. I'll take the Bangladesh question first. It was very, very important what we did because there was the realistic impact that was felt on the ground, but there was a more psychological impact that was felt. Well, and that's because, like I had mentioned in my presentation, Iskcon is the most influential Hindu organization in Bangladesh at the moment. And had we not succeeded in our campaign, it would have pretty much disintegrated the whole Hindu, Buddhist, Christian Unity Council. So what we did have a major impact there. And subsequently, we had our demonstrations. Our Bangladeshi leadership was called by the Home Minister of Bangladesh, which is like the #2 post in the country, to come and start a dialogue with the government on how to go forward. And it also created a lot of impact on the ground in terms of bringing in resources for the minority communities who are suffering. So far, the situation is very peaceful at the time being, but we don't know how or in which direction it's going to go. But for the time being, it's peaceful there. So I hope that answers the first part of the question. The second was about the coin. We are all celebrating the 125th anniversary of Srila Prabhupada for another 9 months now. And it's a very historic occasion. And within that umbrella of all the different festivals, we had one more historic occasion on 1st September when the Prime Minister of India, as a part of the state recognition of Srila Prabhupada, released a special 125 rupees commemorative coin. And a lot of our devotees in different parts of the world have ordered. So if you haven't ordered one yet or would like to order one, please get in touch with your nearest communications team. This is a very valuable and a very memorable gift that you can give to your local members of parliament, to your congressmen, business leaders, and so many other people that really like to get this special collector's edition. So please contact your nearest communications team and they'll be happy to help you. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. There is some glitch on my screen, like I disappeared from the screen, but I have the background, so you'll just have to look at the background instead of me. So we have a question from the audience. Are there any resources of Iskcon's position on more common global issues prepared beyond our individual understanding? And the answer is yes. Please visit our website, iskconcommunications.org. This is a very resourceful website that includes official statements, announcements, courses, startup kits, media kits, videos, and numerous other resources. And also we had a question from the audience about the presentations for reference. And for this, you can email Madan Gopal at iskcon.org. And for Spanish, if you want to ask a question in Spanish, you can email Baladev Prabhu. And for Russian, you can write to Novosti Iskcon on you can write to Novosti Iskcon on Facebook. And also about the recordings of this whole conference. As soon as the recording is ready, we are going to put it up on iskconcommunications.org. For the Spanish version, you can visit Iskcon Noticias on YouTube. And for the Russian version, you can visit the Krishna temple page, Moscow Krishna temple on YouTube. It's called Храм Krishna в Москве in Russian, that's the name. So those are all the things that we wanted to say. I mean, in this Q&A section, we are now right on time as we wanted to finish this conference at 10 a.m. So we thank you very much. And now we are turning over to Anutama Prabhu for some closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Hare Krishna. I just want to thank the organizers, the whole global team, especially Olesia and Baladev Prabhu, our hosts for this conference, for their hard work, and Nanda Prabhu, who was there from Africa, who did a lot of the technical arrangements. I want to thank all of the senior devotees and junior devotees and yet unmanifested devotees who may hear the recording in the future for participating in the event, especially Radhika Raman Prabhu for his excellent presentation. And I'll also put in a plug again for that hermeneutics course. There were a lot of, I'm going to slow down now. There were a lot of comments in the chat box about how wonderful that course is. I taken it once and I signed up the second time. In fact, I missed this week's class of the current version, which is going on at the exact same time as this, because I wanted to be here. But it's such a wonderful course and really opens up our minds to how we can understand how to better study Shastra, understand Prabhupada's teachings, etc. And as mentioned in many of the presentations, I'm looking at Kamala Radha here in the middle of my screen. Iskcon News has kind of, we've redesigned our look. We've expanded some of our features. If you haven't been there recently, please go there, iskconnews.org, iskconnews.org, iskconnews.org. We'd like you to write. We'd like you to submit stories. If you don't have time to write a story, send a message to Kamala Radha. She's got a team of writers that can pick up things that are happening in your location. And we're also looking at some creative things, possibly a video news feed in the not too distant future. We're expanding our podcasts. So that's there. Please take advantage of that. And please, we've got some really wonderful devotees who are working, coordinating regional communications in different parts of the world. So if those of you that are listening, I'm seeing a lot of faces and dear friends. It's so awkward to not be with you. We often have these conferences in Europe, and 50 of us or so get together and have 3 days Sangha, which is always very inspiring. Zoom is great because you can see everybody, but you can't share prasadam, you can't share hugs, you can't share side conversations. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. We're hoping to possibly have a conference in May in Italy. It's very shaky with the COVID situation, but if that comes through, hopefully we'll be with many of you as possible. Those of you that are not part of this team, but just decided to log in because Radhika Raman Prabhu is speaking or for some other inspiration, we encourage you to become part of our team. I remember meeting a publisher of a newspaper in Detroit, Michigan, years ago. And he told me, he said, you know, the fact is no news is anything but local. The only news is local news. So in the same way, the only real communications effort is local. We do so many things globally, but what really counts is what happens locally. Reaching out to the local priest, the local rabbi, the local neighbor, the local scholars, the local political leaders, and that's all up to you. We're only trying to be here to assist all of you. So if you're not part of our team, please join our team. We've got a wonderful and inspiring group of devotees, and it's our pleasure to try to serve you in any way that we possibly can and make Prabhupada's movement better understood around the world. I think all of us have some sense of pain in our heart. The deeper we go in Krishna consciousness, we realize what a beautiful contribution it is for every living being. It doesn't mean everybody has to become a Gaudiya Vaishnava. That's not going to happen. Even when Krishna was personally on the planet, not everybody was his devotee, but we can have a positive impact on the world in so many, many ways. So we really look forward to all of you being part of our team. I want to also recognize Gopal Leela Prabhu, who's on my screen, who's working tirelessly to help promote environmental policies within Iskcon and around the world. And all of you, if I had more time, I've seen Malati now on screen. So many wonderful devotees are here. You're all doing great service, and thank you very, very much. We promised we would do our best to end on time. So according to my screen, we're 1 minute over our allotted time. So we'll quit here. And thank you all for joining us. We'll be following up. We're thinking we'd like to maybe have a maybe face-to-face conference once a year, online once a year. But again, with COVID, maybe we'll do these more often. So thank you so much for joining. We had over 100 people participating here in English, plus I think 30 or 40 in Russian, and I think at least 10,000 in Spanish. If I'll double check that number of holiday approval, but
Maybe.
something like that. Okay, so thank you again. Wonderful to be with everybody. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jai, Hare Krishna.
And at the end of the conference, we would like to ask everyone to come on camera and say Hari Bol so that we can have that on recording.
Oh, that's nice.
Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.
Hari Bol. Hari Bol.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Everybody. And Radhika Ramana is still with us. Thank you, Radhika. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Presentation. I had a couple of people write and say, how were you so fortunate to kick off your conference with Radhika Raman? So I told them, well, we're just blessed. We're just blessed. So thank you, Prabhu.
I'm blessed to have your association, Anuttama Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you all, Prabhus. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Jai Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Nam Prabhu, nice to see you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Wonderful to see you. You look so handsome in your brahmachari jacket. Very professional.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.